Abby to do housekeeping agreement, please.
Thank you, Chair. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, please take instruction from staff and stewards. The assembly point is at Tudor Square. Please can I request everyone to switch mobile devices to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. The meeting today will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. It's also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast this meeting. While ever the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission, for example, if the recording is disrupting the conduct of the meeting or is being undertaken in a manner which could capture personal information, or in the event that a member of the public participating in a meeting objects to being recorded. Thank you, Chair.
I'll now ask each member to introduce themselves. I'm Alan Woodcock, Chair for today, and I'm from East Ecclesfield Ward.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Chaplin. I'm a councillor for Southey Ward and I'm joint chair of this committee.
Good afternoon. My name is Nikki Belfield. I'm the councillor for Firth Park Ward.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Whittaker. I'm the councillor for Stocksbridge and Upper Don. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Janet Riddler, councillor for Stocksbridge and Upper Don.
Hi, I'm Mia Drazik, councillor for Park and Aberthorn.
Hello everyone, my name is Councillor Tony Downing. I'm councillor for Mossborough Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Marion Elliott, councillor for Gleadless Valley.
I'm Henry Nottage, councillor for Hillsborough Ward.
Glynis Chapman, councillor for Mossborough Ward.
Good afternoon. Barbara Masters for Ecclesfield Ward, substitute for Cliff Woodcraft.
Good afternoon, I'm Richard Williams. I represent Stannington Ward.
Do we have any apologies, Abby?
Thank you, Chair. I've had apologies today from Councillor Cliff Woodcraft and his sub is Councillor Barbara Masters. Apologies from Nigat Basharat and Mia is sub and Councillor Gary Weatherall. Apologies. Thank you, Chair.
We do not have any items for Whitelow Public and Press.
No, Chair.
Declarations of interest. Any members?
Oh, what have I done there? Sorry, it looked like I was going to log off then. Yes, I must declare an interest in, as a member of the Peak District National Park Authority for the dog daycare application. I will say at this point that the views expressed in the objections expressed in the application form are from officers, I believe planning officers from the Peak District National Park. I come at it as a member and at this point I have not predetermined this application and I will hear the views from all sides before coming to a decision.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as the councillor for Firth Park Ward, obviously the application about the extension of the cultural centre is in that ward. I have been contacted by people on both sides of the application and I have made it clear to them that I could not express a view either way and I come to this with an open mind today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. We'll move on to item 5, which is minutes of previous meeting, pages 11 to 16. Can I have a full record? Yeah. Thank you. Next item, item 6. Item 6, site visit. We will agree a date and site visit at a later date. Thank you. We have 4 applications to hear today. And the first one is item 7A, planning application number 23/02828/full, which is land 300 metres south of Junction with Whitelow Lane, Shorts Lane, Sheffield, S17 3AH, page 19 of the agenda. I'll hand over now to Michael to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, as ever, the detailed planning assessment set out in the committee report, which has already been circulated before the meeting, that's supplemented by the supplementary information that's been circulated to members, which reports on additional representations received and includes some commentary on that. I'll briefly go through that after I've gone through the presentation. The presentation doesn't correct anything stated in the committee report or supplementary report unless otherwise stated. I'll just briefly go through the site, the proposal, and then summarise the key issues. So the application is a full planning application, and the application is to change the use of a field, which is currently got an established equestrian use for the keeping of horses, to a dog daycare facility. So the use would change from one, what we call sui generis use, to another. So equestrian use being a sui generis use, i.e. not in a use class, and dog daycare facility being sui generis use, also not in a specific use class. There'd also be associated works which would primarily comprise the installation of fencing, which the applicant has demonstrated would be permitted development in any event. The fencing would contain the dogs within the site. There'd also be some restoning and extension of the hard standing next to the existing stable block that's on the site. The stable block itself would have some refurbishment and improvement works, but they would largely not require planning permission, being internal works which don't materially affect external appearance. Other than that, the stable building and the land would remain largely the same, excepting some hedge planting which would be done around the site. So you can see the land is indicated with a red line here, which isn't all that useful to you because it's obviously set in rolling countryside to the west of Dore and Topley. There's a neighbouring property, so the site is to the southeast of Shorts Lane. The nearest neighbouring property is to the northwest of Shorts Lane, and you can see that on the slide in the northwestern corner of the complex of buildings. So this is an aerial photograph which shows the site. So essentially it's a single, approximately 1 hectare field, surrounded by dry stone walling which is tumbled down in places, supplemented by some fencing with sporadic trees around the boundary. There's an existing shared field gate access off Shorts Lane, which is in the western corner, and that's shared between this field and the field to the south, which is, I also understand, is in the applicant's control, but they're not proposing any works on that land. So these are some photos just to take you briefly through the site. So this is a view of the site entrance from Shorts Lane. So you can see the site on your left with the nearest neighbour Farnover on the right. This is the field access gate down to land, which will be retained as is. And then this is just a view looking back. You can see a public footpath sign to the right of the picture. So there's a public footpath that runs diagonally to the side of the site. And then you can see a car on the field, on the hard standing area, and the stable block just beyond the trees. And then this is a view from within the field. From within the field, looking back towards the existing stable block. Sorry, it seems to be a slight glitch with the slides. And you can see the Farnova property and an agricultural building recently constructed at the Farnova property in the background. And then this is a closer view of the stable block that would be converted. And then just a look from the other corner of the field back up the site. Another view with Blackamoor in the background. And then another view across the site. And then this is looking back towards Dore and Totley. You probably can't make out any real detail on this, but there's various buildings within the settlement of Dore and Totley that you can see in the slide. And this just gives an impression of kind of the role in attractive landscape the site's set within. So I'll just briefly take you through the plans now. So this is the red line plan again that the applicants provided. This is a closer view that also shows the topography of the site and where the vegetation lies. And then this is the proposed site line, so the site plan. So the blue line is where the proposed fence line would lie. You can see in the western corner where the slightly extended hard standing that we restoned would be. With an indication of where the free vans that the applicant owns would park. And the stable block, the existing hard standing area, and then proposed around the boundaries of the site is new hedging, and also be some more extensive hedging along the Shorts Lane boundary. This is another plan that just essentially shows a closer view of the before and after proposals for the stable block area. And these are some sectional drawings that give an impression of how the site will change, essentially with the fence added and the hedge. And then these are elevational drawings of the stable block. And this is a plan just showing the intended layout of the stable block. So the three existing stable bay partitions would be adjusted so that the applicant had a larger area to keep the dogs, to allow them to shelter in inclement weather, and also a toilet facility. And you can also see the hard standing with the free vans parked on it. There's also a proposal to install an electric vehicle charging facility, one of the vans being electric. So this is just a drawing showing the intended dog-proof fencing. So it's 1.8 metre high steel mesh fencing with 2 metre posts. That would run all the way around the perimeter of the site. There would also be effectively an airlock system around the hard standing, so the vans could enter the site, then that area could be sealed off, the dogs could disembark and then be allowed into the field without any risk of them escaping. And then this is just a close-up sectional drawing showing the new fence post, fencing and the hedging, which also would take some time to mature to that size. And then a couple of perspective sectional views which attempt to illustrate how the site may look within the landscape. Again, you probably can't make out any real detail, but there's some illustrations of dogs on the site and the new hedging and fencing. So that's all the drawings, and just taking you through the site, how it looks in the landscape. So I'll just briefly run through the key planning issues now. As I say, they're set out in the report. So the site is within the proposal is for a dog daycare use, and essentially there's different types of dog daycare use, but the type proposed is essentially a full service where dogs are picked up to 22 dogs that would be collected in batches. I believe six to eight in each batch in the applicants' vans. So they'd be picked up from clients, then brought to the site. They would usually be walked before they're brought to the site. Then they would be supervised on the site during the day. There would be enrichment for the dogs. There would be a place for them to shelter. There's a separate form of licensing which applies to dog daycare centres, which has requirements about how the welfare of the dogs, the facilities the site has to contain, etc. but essentially that requires that there is some space to shelter and a certain approach to documenting the dogs, their needs and how they're addressed on the site. The dogs would then recreate and exercise on the land during the day and be brought back to the clients in the afternoon. So that's the type of facility proposed. There are other type models for dog fields of this type where you can essentially book slots in a field and bring them yourself, but that's not what's proposed here. And there's a management plan which explains that, which is supposed to be conditions. So essentially it couldn't change into another type of dog daycare facility. So the site is within the green belt and within an area of landscape, natural landscape character, so area of high landscape character. So the two issues with that are essentially the green belt should be preserved as open permanently. So there's a policy of development restraint in the national and local policies on what development can go ahead in the green belt, with the main exclusions being agriculture and forestry development. And then in terms of landscape, essentially the policy framework tries to avoid development which would harm the character of the landscape. So in terms of the green belt assessment, the policy framework allows changes of use to occur as long as they don't harm openness or essentially the purposes of allocating land as green belt. And those purposes, there are various purposes, but the main relevant one here is about urban encroachment. So it's kind of keeping settlements within the confines of their boundaries unless it's planned strategically to expand them, and then preventing development which would essentially send tendrils of urbanisation out into the countryside. So in this case, the assessments out in the report is that the development is appropriate development in the green belt, and the basis for that is that there's very limited structures proposed which would interfere with the openness of the green belt. So there's no particular issue in terms of openness. In terms of purposes, it's acknowledged that the dog daycare use could be considered as a more intensive use than the previous equine use. However, overall, officers don't view it as a particularly urban or intensive type of use, and therefore the conclusion reached is that it is an appropriate change of use within the green belt. In terms of the character of the landscape, the report goes through the potential ways that the development could be considered to affect the character of the landscape, not just visually but also in terms of the beauty and tranquility of the area. So the use would change the appearance of the site to some degree. The hard standing area would be slightly expanded. There would be more vehicles typically found at the site during the operating period between Monday and Saturday. And there would also be dogs on the field rather than horses. There would also be the appearance of the fencing. However, as I've said, that could otherwise be constructed under permitted development. So there would be some change to the appearance of the site. However, officers contend, given the visibility of the site, the context, where there are structures in the context, including agricultural buildings, horse menages, etc., officers' view is that this wouldn't be a materially harmful change to the appearance of the site or materially detract from the character of the landscape. In terms of the tranquility of the area, this is assessed in detail in the report and has been a matter under consideration for some time with the application. So essentially the issue here is that dogs obviously bark. So if you have 22 dogs on a field, the natural concern is that that would spoil the tranquility of the area, potentially interfere with people's amenity. So the applicant's been challenged to demonstrate that this wouldn't occur, and essentially what the applicant has provided is a succession of management plans, so a management plan that's been refined that explains how the use is run, and that's essentially what I described earlier, that the dogs are always supervised in they would have a dedicated member of staff looking after them. They'd be in packs of up to 10. There'd be enrichment provided. The dogs would be kept in an environment where they were responded to if they became distressed or started vocalising. And the applicant further attempted to demonstrate that this would be the case by having a trial day at the site. So this wasn't something requested by officers, but the applicant felt that they should try and further demonstrate that their use would be acceptable. So they had a trial day where they had hosted dogs on the site for I think the overall duration was around 4 hours, around about 20 dogs. And they had an acoustic consultant on site at the time to take noise readings and also to monitor, to look at the behaviour of the dogs and make subjective commentary on that. So that whole exercise was reassuring to officers to a degree, because the noise readings and the subjective assessments appeared to tally with the applicant's contention that dogs in this type of facility would be unlikely to bark frequently and regularly because they were not in an environment where they were stressed and any barking would be dealt with. So that tallies with the observations during the trial day. So taking the objectors' concerns have also been considered. So obviously it's understandable why the local community would feel concerned that the dog field would result in barking. But taking into balance all of the evidence and the nature of the setup, it's considered by officers that it's a reasonable judgment to come to that the use would be unlikely to result in persistent and unobtrusive barking to the extent that the tranquillity of the area and the amenity of residents would be significantly harmed. So those two matters essentially pertain to the green belt and landscape impact of the development. So visually the landscape would only be very moderately changed, and it's not considered by officers that there is strong evidence that the tranquillity would be spoilt. That also relates to the amenity impact, with the main potential concern being adjacent residents being disturbed by dogs barking during the operational period. So I won't go any further into that, but the same conclusion was reached, is that should not occur, subject to adherence to the management plan. The other issues associated with the development are essentially ecological issues. So both the on-site impact of having dogs on the land in terms of any protected species, habitats, etc. on the site, and also potential off-site impacts on the South Pennine Moors Special Protection Area from increased predation from dogs and enrichment from dog feces potentially. So the applicants provided evidence on both of these areas and essentially satisfied officers that it would not be a significant impact, and further that there could be a biodiversity net gain achieved from the development through the planting that's been proposed. Also that the protected species impacts could be mitigated through the inclusion of habitat boxes on the stable block. So essentially, taking all matters into account, officers' recommendation is that the development would not significantly harm the openness of the greenbelt, or the purpose of allocating land at the greenbelt would not significantly harm the amenities of surrounding residents, would be acceptable in ecological terms and highways terms, with the level of traffic associated with the use being low by anyone's judgment. Free vans visiting and leaving the site once per day would be very unlikely to cause any significant issues, notwithstanding the shortcomings of the access to the site. So the overall conclusion recommendation is that planning permission should be granted on the basis there are no material planning policy conflicts. So that's the presentation. I'll just briefly refer to the supplementary information. So the supplementary information reports on further representations, including from 3 new parties submitted after the committee report was finalised. So one of these states a neutral position, which is essentially that dog daycare centres are a good thing because they reduce the need for dog walkers to walk in public areas, which the correspondent indicates they find to be a nuisance on occasion. But they contend that this is potentially not the correct site for such a facility due to its proximity to Blackenmore and the constraints of the highway network. So they state an overall neutral position on the application. In terms of the objections, there have been several further objections submitted. They essentially mainly repeat the points already raised in terms of noise, light pollution, traffic, etc. However, a detailed representation was submitted from a consultant working on behalf of the adjacent neighbouring property. So that's gone through in some detail in the supplementary information. It was a 9-page letter that raised a number of issues. Basically used a comparable appeal decision as a basis for kind of going through and critiquing and explaining an alternative assessment of the application. So the supplementary information goes through that point by point, the key points, and explains why officers remain of the view that planning permission should be granted. Things I'd particularly draw your attention to would be in terms of the enforceability of the management plan and design code. The objector basically contends that would be unenforceable and be overly reliant on local residents on policing whether the applicant actually ran the facility in line with the design code or any successors to the field in line with the management plan and design code. But officers contend that they in fact would be enforceable documents. They're relatively simple documents, so and they essentially describe how the use would run as I've described to you. Officers consider that essentially a breach from the management plan or design code would be readily detectable and could be addressed through a breach of condition. And that's the main point. There are other points picked up in there, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We have 5 speakers against this application and 2 for. So starting with David Barnsley, please.
Oh, that one. Okay, thank you.
You have 5 minutes, David.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chair, committee members, thank you for listening. My name's David Bardsley, and I come to speak on behalf of the Dore Village Society, which is a registered charity, local forum recognised by Sheffield City Council, with over 1,300 members drawn from Dore residents. This application has created a high level of concern. So before I start, can I just ask all those present who are objecting to stand up so you can see the weight of this? I think there's one lady. Can you stand up or wave your hand? Thank you very much. The concern is particularly from residents of properties adjacent to the proposed development. There were 100 objections, 75 from Dore residents, and there were 98 expressions of support, 75 from residents outside Dore, and 58 from customers of Forest Dogs, who are the applicant. I want to address 2 main areas of objection: noise and the importance of the location in relation to the Peak District National Park. Noise from barking dogs was cited in most objections, including 16 from residents of sheltered housing at Fairthorne, where there are 29 flats overlooking the proposed site from above the valley. I noticed all the wonderful drawings just make you think it's a flat site. It's not. It's at the base of a valley, so views from the park and from Fairthorne look down on the site, and the fencing does not therefore obstruct the view. Noise from barking dogs was in most objections. There are 29 flats overlooking the proposed site above the valley. An evaluation of potential noise levels was submitted by the applicant. This stated that a noise receptor was situated at Fairthorne Apartments. Well, I've been there. Neither residents nor the management of the development were aware of this. It's critical because where the receptor was actually located within Fairthorne, which is a big site, could be in an area which was screened by trees. I'm very surprised that the tests carried out were for one dog barking. Now, then, my experience with dogs is that when one starts barking, others will start barking. So the Council's Environmental Protection Department questioned the reliability of the noise report on the grounds that there's no recognised standard for assessing dog day care facilities, and that the trial period of use may not be completely representative of the actual use of the site. The claim that acoustic fencing ameliorates dog noise does not apply for Fairthorne, as it is elevated and the line of sight to the field would in most cases go above the fencing. Planning considered that the applicants had done all they could to measure noise. I dispute this. Decibels alone do not reflect the impact on the human ear. The joyful sound of a blackbird singing is very different from a dog yapping. Forest dogs could have demonstrated noise levels in the real world by involving neighbours in a trial to mimic the use of the site with 22 dogs, but they didn't. Shorts Lane is the boundary of an area of the park designated a natural zone, a wild area with minimal human influence whose beauty is particularly important to conserve. The proposed site, as has been mentioned, is in Greenbelt and is highly visible from the national park. The site is at the bottom of a steep valley, so the proposed fencing will not, in many cases, obstruct views into the field itself, where you can actually see the not very pleasant steel fencing. Now, I point out it's a statutory duty of Sheffield City Council to have regard to the purposes of the national park. The Sheffield City Council Emerging Local Plan states a landscape and visual appraisal should be submitted with planning applications that are likely to impact on the Peak District National Park. No such appraisal appears to have been submitted by the applicant, and although the plan is not yet adopted, there was nothing to prevent planning from requesting such an appraisal. The Park Authority has objected to the proposal on the grounds that the development would have an adverse impact on the setting of the natural zone resulting from the more intensive use. Door Neighbourhood Plan Policy DN2 states that the development must respect the setting of the Peak District National Park.
David, that's your 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Debbie Harrison. Debbie could come to the desk, please.
Hello.
Again, Debbie, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
So I'm Debbie Harrison from Farnover Shorts Lane. Our property faces the site of the planning application. First, I'd like to focus on the immediate impact on the lane. It's a single track with one blind corner, no pavements, the verges are natural overgrown hedgerows, there's no street lighting, and it's a dead end that leads to the bridleways on Blackamoor. It's the only access from Door Village to this area of natural beauty. Passing another car on the lane is difficult in most parts, requiring reversing back and forth to allow others to pass. Cars use the lane to park when accessing Blackamoor. Pedestrians equally passing pedestrians has to be done with care. Cars or people are forced onto the grass verges. There's lots of activity on the lane with the elderly, dog walkers and families with small children wandering along the lane. Cyclists and runners use the lane from early in the morning till late at night, needing extreme care with the lack of street lighting. Horse riders access the bridleways daily from Shorts Lane. All these users of the lane would be adversely affected if the application was approved due to the inevitable increase in traffic and the disturbance of peace and tranquility which draws people to the area. But probably the most affected will be equestrians. 22 dogs in a fenced-off field will hear horses approaching, invariably causes dogs to bark. The noise of multiple dogs barking will inevitably scare horses, putting the horse, rider and other road users in danger. It will put people off accessing the bridleways, force equestrians onto the busy village streets. Neither the motorists nor riders would want. Local dog owners will adversely be affected. One boundary of the field is Shorts Lane, the other is a footpath to Old Hay Lane, used by dog walkers all the time. Any dog walking past a 2-metre wire fence housing 22 dogs would feel intimidated, trigger the dogs inside and outside the fence to bark, causing disturbance to all but distress to local people accessing this beautiful spot. I'd like to say a little more about noise from our perspective. We're in a valley and noise carries. We can clearly hear Tigers rugby games and the Hallamshire riding events, both on Hathersage Road a mile away. Also events in the village green just less than a mile away. All are occasional, pleasant village activities. Dog barking 6 days a week is not pleasant, but will carry far and wide from the valley. When dogs bark on our lane or on the bridleway, we hear them inside our house, and so do our 3 dogs who immediately bark. Having 22 in an outdoor care centre will inevitably lead to lots more barking than normal. They're 22, plus the passing dogs, and even our dogs in our own home. My family frequently work from home, and we are very concerned about our ongoing ability to do that with the disturbance that dog care would cause. The noise report is not credible. When the dogs have been monitored in a very controlled circumstance, in reality it's not the case, as per the short video clip provided to the planning office showing the van parked in the field and 8 dogs running around barking over the wall at a passerby. This happens all the time. Finally, I'd like to air our concerns regarding the management plan and its enforcement. Most importantly, I want to flag this field is rented on a short-term lease. The lease might not be renewed, but the change of use is permanent. Another dog care business who could set up with less regard for the impact on local residents. They acknowledge that there will be noise disturbance and have tried to make provision to minimise the noise, but once a business is operating, will standards slip? Mr. Irving may be an experienced dog handler, but his staff change. He plans to engage volunteers and students, which could massively increase noise levels. They plan to transport the dogs in their 3 vans, but there is nothing to stop customers dropping off and collecting their own dogs. It could massively increase traffic. The business may need to create more revenue, applying pressure on increasing the number of dogs using the facility vans coming to and fro, or extending the operating hours. There's no provision to check the management plan is adhered to, and I believe that unreasonably it will fall upon us as the nearest neighbours. The facilities on site are not adequate for 3 people and 22 dogs. In poor weather, all sheltering in 3 wooden stables is unimaginable, as is the resulting barking and noise. If the business is growing as fast as they claim, this is not an appropriate site. Their own website agrees that this location is not suitable. Their search criteria includes good road access, a building or barn, mains, power and water, farms without livestock. This site with poor access, surrounded by fields with sheep, cows and horses, and no fresh water, no mains drains, inadequate small building with little light is inappropriate. I'm really sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Bernard Shorter, please. Thank you, Bertie. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bernard Shorter. I'm a resident at Fairthorne, which is a block, a 4-storey block of flats that looks down on Shorts Lane, which is the area in contention. The residents of Fairthorne are all retired people, and I have been there for about 5 years or more. In the winter, from Fairthorne, and I live on the lower floor, I can not only see the dogs, but hear them. And of course, all those levels of people above me will get an even better view and indeed the enhanced sound. Because as has been mentioned, Shorts Lane is in a valley and there's a big echo and all the noise is magnified quite considerably. Of course, we do hear noises along Shorts Lane. There's cows and sheep and even the odd dog, which of course we can hear, but it's just now and again. It's part of what you expect to hear in a rural area, and so it doesn't bother us. But 22 dogs coming there regularly between 8 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock at night, 6 days a week, is quite frankly alarming. I think I crossed the word alarming out. I did, and put frightening. We are all elderly at Fairthorne, and a lot of us don't have transport. We've got ailments that prevent us from getting out, so we spend a lot of time in our flats. And we do things like reading, knitting, and playing jigsaw puzzles. Now, supposing you're doing a jigsaw puzzle and suddenly there's this blast of noise of dogs barking, which is extremely irritating. But what is more irritating is that you're now going to wait for the next blast of dog barking, and that is quite disturbing and will affect our mental health. It's like akin to the second shoe falling. Of course, we do get outside when we can. We've got balconies and patios and loads of seats around the grounds. So we can sit outside and take in the fresh air, look at the views, and enjoy the peace of quiet. I would remind you that we choose to live at Fairthorne. We pay a considerable amount of money to live at Fairthorne, and we do it because of the facilities that Fairthorne has to offer. And one of those crucial aspects of it is the peace and quiet. Please, please do not spoil it. Thank you.
Our next speaker is James Mee, please.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
You have 5 minutes, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard, for those strong words and very, very moving for us all. I think we all agree on that. I'm James Mee, and I live at Roundseats Farm, approximately 200 metres north of the site, up the valley. I was on Shorts Lane this morning. What a lovely, peaceful location. It's a picturesque valley. We're on the edge of the Blackamoor Nature Reserve and the National Peak Park within a few metres. There was a stag and deer on the subject site this morning, which is a lovely sight. There's a lady out on her horse as well on Shorts Lane, virtually nobody else around. It is a very quiet, peaceful spot. Currently, very much agricultural and pastoral in its character and usage. and the proposal to change this use massively, from a stable block for 3 horses, which is very low usage, and to intensify that change of use, a serious change of use, to a fully operational, intensive business to make profit. With 22 dogs to start with, you know, where does it go from there? It's not in character with the location at all. We've touched on the access and traffic. I mean, the lane is very tight. I've used the lane for sort of the last 14, 15 years. It is dangerous to walk on. Young children learn to ride the bicycles on there, and to have a lot more cars using it. I mean, yes, Forest Dogs are talking about 3 vans, but does 3 vans become 4 or 5? What's to stop people whose dogs they're looking after coming to look at the dogs on the site during the day? It's going to get really busy on there. My access is just off Whitelow Lane. Whitelow Lane itself is dangerous. There's 2 or 3 bends. There's a bridge. There have been numerous accidents on that bridge, numerous accidents on the corner where I live, and even one just 2 weeks ago which took out my wall and a car overturned. It's just not an appropriate location. In regard to noise, I can hear, I mean, Whitelow Lane from where I live to the top is 0.9 of a mile. It's the A625 Hathersage Road. I can hear cars all the time on Hathersage Road. Sheffield Tigers, approximately a mile away, you can hear them chanting and cheering on a Saturday. We're in a valley. It echoes. It's like an amphitheatre. I believe the noise report that's been undertaken, you know, nobody came to where I live to hear what the noise is like. Whether anybody went to Fairthorne, probably unlikely. It just travels across the valley and upwards. I think the noise report, is very unreliable that's been done and not taking into account the local neighbours. Very, very important. Dogs barking, we're going to control them. What a joke. What a joke. I've got 3 dogs. I've got 2 gun dogs. They're very controlled. But if they want to bark, they bloody bark. Excuse my language. Dogs bark because they're excited. Dogs bark because they're nervous. Dogs bark because other dogs bark. You ain't going to stop that. It's in the nature. Even last night, one of my neighbours, Leanne Elwood, who lives probably 800 metres away, her dog was barking. My dog started barking. And, you know, trying to tell them to stop, they do eventually, but it's too late then. There's been masses of objections. The majority of the objections are from local people, but most strongly, Peak Park are very against it. And certainly Sheffield Council, I believe, Planning Department should take on board what they've said. I believe...
That's your 5 minutes.
Thank you. It'd be a travesty of justice if it goes through. Yeah.
Our last speaker is Sue Millward. Thank
Hello.
you, Sue. We have 5 minutes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hello, my name's Sue Millward and I live at number 4 Blackmore View. In effect, I live on top of the valley, looking down. My house is called Stagview House. I've lived there for 7 years and we've called it that for a reason. The stags live on the surrounding hills, and at rutting time, which is just starting now, come down to this site, and in particular this field. I believe you can see a picture of the actual stags sitting in the field from the letter that was enclosed from Eric Telford. They use that for the rutting season. What is proposed is that you encase this field in a metal fence. An adult deer will jump between 8 and 10 feet. They will impale themselves on this fence. And the noise that the dogs will make, stags particularly, because they are a flight animal, you are running the risk that you drive these animals out of this area completely. They have been there for years, and it is beautiful. What I'm really concerned about also is what are you going to do with the dog waste that 22 dogs create in a field? In order to collect that waste, you will have to cut the grass very, very low in order to be able to see it and collect it effectively. So what you're actually proposing is a metal fence round a field with very short grass. What you can't see from the pictures that you've seen previously is that this is a place of outstanding natural beauty, rolling hills with sheep all around the hills. How strange will this look, a square field with a metal fence with low grass? It is just not in keeping with this place of outstanding natural beauty, with a nature reserve at the side. Not to mention the change of use of the inadequate stable. There are no toilets on that property at the moment, so that stable is going to have to be altered dramatically, and that in turn will affect the look of the land. We have an abundance of natural wildlife: badgers, bats, rabbits, deer, foxes. All of these will be dramatically affected by encasing this field. They all use that field as their thoroughfare or their homes. Opposite my house, I have a 180-degree view of it. Then I can see the sheep. The nearest wall to the sheep is 270 yards away from my house, and to the furthest part of the field is 650 yards. Sheep make a noise between 45 and 76 decibels when they bar. Dogs bark between 85 and 100 decibels. And where this field is going to be, it's 370 yards away from my house. I can assure you, no one came to do a sound impact assessment at my house, and I will hear every single bark. Dogs bark because they're excited, happy. They bark all the time. Indeed, I was walking along Shorts Lane the other day with my dog, and actually forest dogs were in the field, and all the dogs started running towards the road where I was and actually scared my dog because they were all barking at us. The growing of the hedge around to stop that is going to take quite some time, and it's going to have a major effect on the local people that live there. I am very lucky to have a bat colony in my house that has been there for 5 years. Bats are extremely susceptible to noise pollution, and these dogs, without doubt, will dramatically increase the noise pollution of the area. It will, in effect, make me a prisoner in my own house. I work in a busy school, come home every afternoon and sit in the garden, and like the residents of Fairthorne, want to enjoy the peace and tranquility and listening to the bird song of what's currently in the area, not 22 dogs barking. This is a place of outstanding natural beauty, and I do not understand how one individual is allowed to make financial gain and upset all the local residents and damage all the local wildlife. He's upset so many people, yet this is just one individual bringing dogs from outside the area.
5 minutes, thank you. Thank you very much. We have two speakers for this application. The first being Andy Irving. Approach the desk, please. You have 5 minutes, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. As you know, my name is Andy Irving. I started Forest Dogs at the end of 2019. I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about myself and the business to give you the context and understanding that we are simply a small family business hoping to grow. Before starting Forest Dogs, I worked as a probation officer and then into treatment services for drug and alcohol users and offenders. I then moved to the University of Sheffield and as a research associate published several papers on the impact of alcohol use on the urgent care system. I took the difficult decision to take redundancy in 2019 and start Forest Dogs to give myself and my wife a better way to live in our new family, having recently adopted 3 young children. Before leaving university, I remember doing a little unofficial market research with colleagues about what they would want to see from a new dog care service in Sheffield. The most significant feedback was the importance of trust. Trust that I care for the dogs the way that their owners do. I cannot stress enough that our dog daycare model is entirely set apart from the warehouse-based dog daycare business model where dogs are often very under-exercised, bored, stressed, and therefore make noise. The warehouse model is not for me. I do care about the welfare of dogs. I've always loved dogs and equally love the great outdoors. I set up Forest Dogs with a commitment to a more nature-based, outdoorsy way of caring for dogs. We are, after all, the outdoor city. Dogs need dogs, and dogs need a proper exercise and green spaces just like we do. I do need to stress that we are not and will never run dog kennels or any business like this. We walk our dogs. We pick them up from their owners' houses in the morning, give them a really good, vigorous walk in a group, then take some of those dogs back to our family home for the daycare 3 to 4 p.m. when we take them home. We currently run this business from our home, a terraced house in Crooks, that is licensed and accredited as 5-star by this council. I will continue this way of working as we believe dogs only settle and relax when they have had sufficient exercise and appropriate socialisation. Our experience since 2019 has shown that our approach works and dogs are happiest and calm with this routine. To date, we have had no complaints from neighbours, and in fact, one submitted a letter of support for our application. I've worked very hard to build a good business, now with an excellent reputation in Sheffield, which means a lot to me. We are known for our strict policy on the dogs we take. Clients attend an initial assessment, trial walks, trial daycare, and trial overnight. This way we get to know the dogs and be confident they can behave appropriately and quickly build a relationship with them as surrogate owners. We have a robust management plan, and given the high demand for our services, we are able to be selective with the dogs we take and on occasion discontinue our services due to poor behaviour. I've also worked on other aspects of the business that I feel set us apart. I, like many here, care deeply about the environment and about animals in general. That's why even as a very small business, I committed to my environment policy and we joined the 1% for the Planet organisation so that it gave 1% of our annual turnover to this organisation and their environmental partners. This supports global efforts to tackle climate change and help local groups protect and enhance our green spaces around Sheffield. I have also committed to making all of our vans fully electric, and I'm due to collect the second of 3 later this month. This is also why at Shorts Lane I have worked hard to make sure we can enhance the quality of the site itself and the biodiversity of the area and help protect local wildlife, something that is acknowledged by the ecologist and the officer in this report. I've met with the Woodland Creation Officer at the Peak District National Park about planting more trees, and with the Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust, the manager of Blackamoor, and also the Eastern Moors Partnership and local farmers. We have committed to not walking our dogs off lead on open access land, particularly during ground nesting bird season, I have proactively sought their specific advice on how we can protect birds and support local efforts to conserve wildlife in and around Shorts Lane. I want to reassure you that we are a team of kind and considerate dog care professionals, keen to showcase how good outdoorsy dog care can be. With the sensible compromises and conditions noted, I hope we can begin to work the land at Shorts Lane again. Please support our application for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is John Warnock. Can you have 5 minutes, Joanne? Thank you.
Thank you. My dogs have been looked after by forest dogs for 3 years, and without them and the service they provide, I don't know what I would do. I have dogs for several reasons. It makes me get out into the great outdoors, and I benefit from the exercise as well as my dogs benefiting. But I mainly have dogs because they help my mental and emotional well-being, and they provide great comfort and company. 2.5 years ago, I lost my husband, who I shared dog walking with. After a time, I went back to work, but I had to find a good dog walker and daycare for my dogs. And without that, I would not have been able to go back to work, and it was really important to me in trying to create a new life for myself. Looking for good dog care is a minefield. There are many, many dog walkers not good. Some dog walkers take too many dogs, which is unsafe. Some are unlicensed. They see it as a money-making business with no proper care. They have a lack of training knowledge on how to deal with dogs, and they lack the basic understanding of dog behaviour and language. And forest dogs and Andy are not like this. I spent a lot of time researching dog care and dog walkers in the area, and the name that came up time and time again was Forest Dogs, and so I contacted them. They were in huge demand, which is always a good sign, and at the time they only had space for one walk, ideally, but I grabbed the chance and they now walk them at least 3 times a week, plus holiday cover. Last year, I decided to get another dog for company, and I now have a cockapoo as well as a beagle, and they were brilliant. They would not take the puppy until he was properly socialised with other dogs, and his recall was really good. And at first, they suggested that he went for at least half a day so he could get used to it, but more importantly, they could check that he was a well-behaved dog. A bit like a toddler starting nursery. But that is what it is like at Forest Dogs. They're very professional, and they help to introduce the new dog to other dogs and ensure that they're well behaved. I cannot imagine Forest Dogs ever taking dogs that are not already well behaved and well trained or not comfortable. They are very responsible. I would also like to address the concerns about dogs barking, which I do understand. Dogs bark, people speak, babies cry, and horses neigh. But they do bark when they are stressed, and particularly when they're not properly exercised, so they get bored. And they're more likely to bark if they are bored and not getting enough mental stimulation. As a dog owner for over 13 years, I know the importance of good walks and how dogs are after exercise. And after being on a good walk, most dogs will actually sleep. My dogs always rest and sleep when they return from Forest Dogs, and they always provide very long walks, usually out for at least 60 to 90 minutes. Furthermore, I have visited Forest Dogs' current premises on many occasions, and I have never ever heard dogs persistently barking. They are well exercised and provided with mental stimulation, such as scent games, and I do not believe there will be persistent barking that causes a problem on the site. The owners of Forest Dogs are very professional and responsible, and they always make sure they follow the rules. When they are at capacity, they will never take extra dogs and walks. No means no, and there is no bending the rules to fit anybody else in. And there are also very strict rules for pick-up and drop-offs to avoid disruptions to current neighbours. I understand pick-ups will not be made at the proposed site. So from my experience of their rule following, I foresee no risk that there will ever be more than 22 dogs at Shorts Lane, and there will never be any rule bending on the site. In my opinion, they are the most professional, best dog care business in Sheffield, and I know others must think the same, as there are always waiting lists to get a place. There are many benefits to this application. For the dogs, they will be well exercised and well socialised. They get to enjoy outdoor space in a safe environment, and they will get good quality care without any separation anxiety from not being alone while they're owners are at work. But as well as creating employment for people, for Forest Dogs customers like myself, allowing them to use this space will allow people like me to have a peace of mind knowing that their dogs are safe. We will be allowed to keep having dogs for comfort and company, because some of us do have to work. And most importantly, we'll have access to high quality dog care, allowing people to work, which has got to be good for them, for wider society and the wider economy. So I wholeheartedly support the application for providing doggy daycare service at Shorts Lane. The plans are not out of character for the space, and I believe it will be enhanced and provide a great service to the wider community. It will benefit many people who rely heavily on good dog care so they can work, and I know Forest Dogs will abide by rules and restrictions to ensure local people are not inconvenienced. Thank you for providing me with the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, John. Michael, would you like to come back on any of that?
Thank you, Chair. I think maybe it might be best to pick that up in questions mainly, but on one specific, but from members, I'm thinking, because if I go through everything, it's going to take quite a long time. But maybe just a couple of specific points. I think to explain the noise report, maybe, or the two noise reports. Yeah. So there were two noise reports submitted for the application. There seems to be a little bit of confusion about what they did. The first one, essentially, was a background noise survey at the site, and then it modelled the impact of a barking dog from receptors, including the care home, the adjacent property, and another receptor. So there was no monitoring at the care home, as people rightly point out. It was a modelling assessment based on a discussion with our environmental health officer about what the maximum noise a dog barking at 1.5 metre height from a metre away would be. It then predicted what the impact would be at the receptors and suggested that that impact wouldn't be significant, essentially. So that was the first noise report submitted. So there was concerns about that raised by environmental health because...
No, sorry. No, not allowed.
Because they essentially said that although there had been a methodology followed, there wasn't a standard methodology for that activity. They'd related it to clay pigeon shooting methodology in terms of impact, as well as World Health Organization rules on internal noise levels, etc. So what they did then was they held a trial day, and the acoustician came back out and he took noise readings around the site boundary during the trial day, and he worked, it's based on the actual experience of the dogs being on site during that time, and he did a second assessment.
Can you please be quiet?
He did a second assessment based on that. So I'm just explaining the facts. If you just let me explain that. All I'm trying to explain is the first noise report was based on modelling. The second one was based on readings at the site boundary, based on a trial day. So those are the two reports set out that are discussed in the committee report. I thought it was just worth clarifying that because there was concern that readings hadn't been taken where it suggested they had, which isn't the case.
I'm sorry. There's no public questions. I'm sorry, and I'm going to read something out now, and this applies to all the members of the public. Due to the disturbance caused by you, the conduct of the meeting of the committee, you are hereby issued with a warning in accordance with Rule 20 of Sheffield City Council's procedure rules. Under this rule, should you create any further disturbance to the conduct of the committee of the meeting, I may order your removal from the meeting room. Thank you. Members' questions. I have Barbara first.
Thank you, Chair. I know that we're very limited in what we can decide because we only can make the decisions on planning grounds, regardless of our other issues. So can I just clarify? We have no rights to comment on the number of dogs on site. That is a licensing issue.
If I may, Chair. So there's a planning condition suggested to cap the number of dogs, and that's basically to limit the intensity of the use. How many dogs they could keep on the site would depend on the licensing arrangements. What Forest Dogs have said is it would be between 14 and 22. So it depends, and that's based on the amount of internal and external space available at the site. So they aren't clear, as far as I understand it from the submission, exactly how many dogs they would be limited to under the licence. So the cap will be 22 as proposed on the planning condition. It may be capped lower under the licence.
Thank you. So they haven't applied for a licence yet. That would be dependent on what our decision is today. Would that be correct?
Through you, Chair, I don't believe it's contingent upon obtaining planning permission to apply for a licence. It may or may not be, but obviously they couldn't run the facility unless they had both.
Right, thank you. Now, I'm a bit concerned about the actual space available for the dogs and the staff and storage facilities on the site. Is that stable the only place where the dogs can shelter and staff and all the other facilities that would go with sort of having a dog facility there?
As shown on the plans, that is the only space. This was raised with the applicant during the assessment of the application, and they explained that essentially the premise is that the stables is a place to shelter. However, it's not an indoor facility. Dogs wouldn't be penned in there. Therefore, they considered there was enough space combined with the outdoors and the shelter to provide for the welfare of dogs based on what they would do in terms of making sure dogs had appropriate clothing during inclement weather, etc.
Thank you. And I suppose I think it's a bit ironic that we had the workshop about biodiversity just before this, which highlights the importance of wildlife and space. And I mean, I know that the Peak Park Planning Authority has objected to this. Can you just sort of explain on which grounds?
I think it's fair to say they're worried about encroachment in proximity to the national park of dog uses, and they consider it's likely to have a net negative effect if such uses are allowed close to the national park. And I think that as well as concerns about the setting of the park and the landscape. So I think it's essentially in two parts. Both are assessed in the report, and essentially the conclusions reached that the impact in terms of the additional dog walking, etc., on the in the national park would be relatively negligible compared to the total amount of dog walking, and also the landscape impact wouldn't be significant.
Thank you. I'll let somebody else have a go now.
Mike?
They were good questions, Barbara. Yeah. And that means that I have less to ask you, Michael. On the grassland, historically this would have been land that was either grazed by sheep, cattle, and when horses were there, they're grazers. Dogs are not. So I'm keen to understand what would be done to keep the grass down. What I did notice yesterday was that it is quite clumpy and tufty on that field, so it's not lowland grazing as such. I have another question about the well, we'll cut to the chase here. Let's say that the residents living nearby, their worst fears are realised, and that the dogs are making such noise and disturbance. What measures does the council have to curtail that activity? Now, I'm not gainsaying what the applicant has said. I'm sure he does want to run a very responsible business, which is why he's got so many clients, and that it is being run in quite a different way. But it would be useful to know that were planning permission granted and things weren't working out in the area, what measures would be in place to address that?
Through you, Chair. So in terms of, first of all, the grass on the site, obviously it's not been grazed for a while, so it has regenerated into non-cropped, longer grass, tufty like say. When we were on site, we saw that there'd been some strimming off on the top near the stables. My understanding is that the application doesn't have a management plan for the grassland, so it's not 100% clear. But my assumption would be that they may want to maintain it like that, as in have some closer crop grass near the stables, and potentially longer grass elsewhere to provide a variety for the dogs. That'd be my assumption, but it wouldn't be essentially controlled through the planning. They could trim it or not as they wished. Obviously, if it was in equestrian use, it'd be grazed, so the grass would be short in any event. In terms of persistent barking, so if planning permission was granted, it would be subject to conditions. The conditions essentially cap the number of dogs, restrict the hours of operation, and require the site to run in accordance with the management plan. If the site wasn't running in accordance with the management plan or exceeded any of those limits, the council could issue a breach of condition notice. However, that doesn't directly relate to persistent barking. I mean, if there was persistent barking, we would first of all investigate whether the management plan wasn't being adhered to. If it was, and there was still persistent barking, there would be statutory nuisance legislation. So anyone who has been caused a statutory nuisance can make a complaint to Environmental Health, where they would investigate, usually contact the owner and look at whether they're using best practicable means to minimise the noise impact. So those are the two forms of control. I don't know for sure whether there's a separate form of control under licensing as well, whether the licence could be withdrawn on the sort of amenity or nuisance grounds. I suspect not. I think that's more about animal welfare.
Chair, can I just come back up then on, so is licence renewal annual, or is it more prolonged than?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question.
Mark?
My question is also about wildlife, but I'd just like to preface that by saying my parents spent the last 7 years of their life in the Fairthorne Sheltered Complex, so I know the area very, very well. I was living in Totley at the time, and I would walk over to visit them every Saturday and Sunday, and using all of the paths around there, over the hills and along the valley, and ending up at Shorts Lane. They used to walk along Shorts Lane as their daily exercise, which they loved for the peace and quiet. Now, on one of my walks over, and this is where the wildlife thing is, I can confirm that there was a rustle in the bushes as I was walking, and suddenly, it was this time of year, 3 stags bounded out of the bushes across the path in front of me, one after another. They were only 5 feet in front of me. So I can absolutely confirm from my own experience that the place is rich in wildlife. Now, can I remind everyone that dogs are bred from predators, horses are not. I think deer would be disturbed by dogs and not by horses, and I don't think it would just be the barking of the dogs. I think it would be the smell of the dogs.
Do you have a question?
The question is, has enough regard really been given to the effect of the wildlife in the area?
Chair, so the applicant's undertaken an ecological impact assessment that has basically done a survey of the field to see what wildlife is there. There was some protected species identified and mitigated. In terms of the deer, what I'd say on that, which I said in supplementary information, essentially is, so the type of fencing proposed is essentially the same design as deer fencing. So what the site will do is take a field away from the deers for rutting and grazing and foraging and whatnot. So the deers aren't a endangered species. They are protected by law, but mainly protected from certain forms of ammunition being used to shoot them and from poaching. So it's a slightly different situation than it is for an endangered species. However, the assessment remains that taking that field away from use by deers would be unlikely to be a significant impact. I mean, the dogs may, and it goes back to the assessment about how the dogs are being managed, not barking persistently. It's all interwoven. A badly run facility, I guess, would have the potential to cause a disturbance to local wildlife.
It's not really the taking the field away from the deer, it's the fact that suddenly in the middle of the deer's terrain is what they perceive as 22 predators that they will be well aware of, even if they're not barking a lot.
I mean, all I'll say is that there are threats and predators within that terrain already, and if anyone's ever encountered any deers, they'll be well aware, with a dog, they'll be well aware that they do, you know, run away. I think the only point I'd just make is that they're not an endangered species, and there's no protected species issues in terms of that concern.
Richard?
Thank you, Chair. My interest in this, and the questions coming from it, is really to do with the boundary treatments. Now, in the report, it talks very clearly about these are permissible developments, but it gives two conditions. One, that they're not above 2 metres, and secondly, they're not on land which is adjacent to a highway used by vehicles. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Shorts Lane is a highway used by vehicles, and so the key is is there a specific technical measurement for what is deemed adjacent?
If I may, therein lies a lengthy planning discussion that is often raised in planning enforcement. Essentially, obviously, abutting a highway is adjacent. As you get further and further away, at some point it stops being adjacent. There's an element of discretion based on various factors about the character of the lane, etc. So in this case, the applicant applied for a lawful development certificate to prove that the fencing would be lawful. We rejected the first application on that very basis. The applicant then adjusted the boundary treatments, essentially made sure everything was set outside of the tree line into the field, maintaining the existing gate with no interaction between the fencing and the gate on Shorts Lane. We were then satisfied that no fencing was adjacent to a highway used by vehicular traffic, and we approved the second certificate.
Okay, I'm just coming back, if I may. If you flick on a couple of slides, I believe there's a close-up with that one. That one. In the most, for me, left side of the square, the fence becomes, if I've got this right, much closer to the road than the big block to the further up. And so that's one point I'd like some consideration on. And secondly, is a hedge a boundary treatment, a newly planted hedge a boundary treatment? Because, again, looking at what I perceive to be the newly planted hedge on the left of that square, that really is adjacent to the road. I mean, it's next to it. So I question whether actually this is a permissible development.
So on the first point, the fence line is all a similar line along. You can see the blue line. It does jut out slightly where the hard standing is. We're satisfied it isn't adjacent. Hedging does not require planning permission. Is the short answer on that. So we're essentially satisfied all the fencing is not adjacent to the highway, and the hedge doesn't require planning permission.
I'll bow to your judgment.
Tony, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Looking at the report, and it says that the dogs would be transported to and from the site by the applicant. Obviously, there in the report it states that, but there is also some concern from the residents in the area that I've heard this afternoon, that traffic would intensify. I'm getting a sense of feeling that people are fearful that people will be bringing their dogs to there and collecting them, or even calling during the day to visit to see if the dogs are okay. Can we have clarification, please? Is this going to be a transitional thing, or will it be just the applicant collecting and delivering the dogs before and after their stay at the centre? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. My view would be that it would be a breach of the management plan if so the management plan describes how the use occurs. It states that clients will not visit the site and leave the site. If we became aware of that, I think we could enforce against the management plan. If members would like further reassurance, it would be possible to have a more explicit condition either on the number of vehicles that can enter the site on a given day, or a clear prohibition on the clients of the facility driving to the site. We can only control what basically vehicles entering or leaving through the boundary, because that's what's in the control of the applicant. So that's why the conditions are as they are with the management plan. But it would be possible to have an additional condition that had either a vehicle restriction or a restriction on the type of vehicles that could enter. That does occur on certain types of planning permission, more commonly for waste uses, etc.
Thank you, Chair. If it is passed, this plan today, this application today, can we condition that is the case, that no one comes and goes there? The dogs will be taken and brought by the applicant. Thank you.
Vicky?
Thank you, Chair. If members want to propose an additional condition and second that, obviously you can take a vote on whether to add that to the permission.
Are you proposing, Tony?
Yes. Yeah, I propose that, thank you.
Can you tell me what you're proposing?
Yeah, proposing that no persons other than the applicant brings the dogs or takes the dogs from the site before and after the day.
Can we say and staff?
And
because
staff.
There are,
and
yeah.
staff as well, yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I was going to say sort of add during the day as well, because I think that was the concern of a lot of the residents. It wasn't just collecting and removing, it was visiting during as well.
Chair, I think when the planning officer just mentioned there what an additional condition could include, I think he was quite specific in terms of entering and exiting the site, as opposed to what people may do otherwise, which is something that isn't within the control of necessarily of the applicant. For example, anybody could pull up and look over the fence and be a customer, for example. So I think the planning officer there did mention it was an additional condition that may meet the 6 tests that I often refer to, would be about who could enter or exit the site. Thank you.
Tony?
I didn't quite understand that. Could you just repeat that for me, please?
So yeah, just now the planning officer said that if members want an additional condition, something that you may request through a proposal and the usual means, would be about who could enter and exit the site. So for example, you could limit it to just the staff of the facility. But I think when in that short discussion there was about who could visit the site, that we wouldn't be able to control through conditions somebody pulling up outside the site, for example, and looking at looking over the fence to the extent that you possibly could. So I just want to make sure that in terms of a proposal for a new condition, the planning officer said about people entering and exiting the site other than staff is something that could be a reasonable condition for members to propose.
Yeah, I accept that as you said it. Thank you.
Do I have a seconder?
Can I just ask, what about if they needed people to deliver things, or people who are servicing, I don't know, the utilities, for example? How would that fit into it?
Thank you, Chair. You know, if members are concerned about the customers, you know, you could say, you know, customers are not allowed to enter and exit the site, for example, and then it would, you know, it would cover that that issue.
Are you proposing that one, Tony? That customers cannot enter and exit the site?
Yes, that's right, yeah. Customers not to exit or enter the site.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second it, Chair.
Can I just make a point? I don't disagree with Tony's sentiment, but conditions have to be realistic. I mean, all it needs is a member of staff to walk the dog out to the customer who's waiting on the road, and it just overcomes that. So I think we have to be very careful that we're not tying ourselves up in knots here.
Yeah, I agree with Richard.
Chair, just to on that line, I think what the planning officer said is that the entering the exit the site of the dogs is currently controlled by the management plan, which is conditioned. And the planning officer said if members wanted further assurance regarding that concern, this was a possibility. So just in that instance, they're the two elements of control that we're discussing. The condition that's already there about the management plan, which is proposed to manage that process. But if you wanted to be more explicit, I think that's where the planning officer said that a further condition could be proposed by yourselves. Thank you.
So I've had a proposal, I've had a seconder on customers not entering or exiting the site. Can I take a vote on that, please?
Do it by show of hands.
Yeah, by show of hands. Yeah.
So, wait, are we voting for or against at the moment?
Right, 4. Anybody for? Apart from Tony, Michael, 2. Against? Abstain? That proposal lost.
Sorry, Chair, can I just confirm the numbers there? I believe you had a proposal and it was seconded, and you had 2 people for, 1 against, and then abstentions. Therefore, that vote was to add that condition was successful. Obviously, it doesn't, you know, necessarily impact what the actual vote on the officer recommendation may be. Thank you.
Chair, I have to say that for that to be carried on just the vote of Tony and myself, I'm not happy with that. Clearly there's a lot of ambivalence there.
Can I say, if this is a business, if it gets past that it's a business, people will want to turn up and view this prospective business for their future dog going there. You know, I think it's an unrealistic condition, really.
Okay.
Chair, just in terms of that vote on that condition there, as I say, you know, the vote was passed to add that condition, but I appreciate what may not have been clear for members in terms of the numbers of abstentions is that voting on that condition doesn't impact how you may vote on the actual officer recommendation. You know, you could vote for that condition to be added should it be passed, but then you still have your total discretion to vote as you choose when we actually come to vote on the officer recommendation. So obviously that additional condition will only be applied should the officer's recommendation be approved. So it's I appreciate your position, Councillor Chaplin, regarding only 2 people voting for it, but obviously more people voted for it than against it, therefore it should be added to the permission if it is later granted when we move to the vote. Thank you. obviously members can propose, to now remove that if they so wish. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky.
I don't know about Tony, but I feel we should withdraw it because it's not got the support across the from the other members.
Okay, withdraw it then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Apologies to be a pedant on this, but obviously I think you've proposed something there, Councillor Chaplin, that Councillor Downing seconded, so you probably just want to have a show of hands on that motion. Thank you, Chair.
Right, shall we vote for, please? Show of hands for. Withdrawing. For withdrawing the... Against? Abstain? Right, thank you very much on that one. On, we have Nikki next, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, just a point of clarification for myself, because people were talking about the 1.8 metre metal fence. Is it solid metal or is it like metal wire mesh or?
It's a fine steel mesh. So it's welded mesh, but it's relatively fine gauge.
Am I right in thinking it's similar to what there was already there on parts of the site?
So a wider gauge. The existing fencing's kind of like that, whereas it's kind of really narrow gauge. The fence. It's very similar to deer-proof fencing.
Does that kind of fencing, is it the way you described as a design to make it sort of less impactful on the surroundings?
So the design of the fencing is obviously it's primarily designed to prevent dogs escaping the site. It's because it's a mesh rather than solid. It has less impact than it would a solid fence. However, it has more impact than would be than the existing fencing, which is wider gauge because it's less see-through, less permeable.
Thank you. Just another couple of practical, hopefully quick questions. Could you remind us what the arrangements will be for power, water and the toilet facilities? And also, if somebody else took over the site, somebody raised that you could have permission, this business could work well, but then the permission's still there and somebody else could take over the site and run it not so well. What would happen in terms of like the management plan, which is obviously part of this permission? Would that apply to the new people who worked there? And then just a final quick question about bats, just because somebody did raise that in terms of in their home and any sort of likely impact on them. Thank you.
Thank you for your chair. So in terms of utilities, the existing electricity connection, the applicant's proposing to put in a new water connection. They're proposing a composting toilet. As I understand it, they're not proposing to put in a new sewage connection. So there would be a new water connection going in and a pit for the composting toilet. So in terms of the management plan, except in the rare cases of personal permissions, planning permission and temporary permissions, obviously planning permission will run with the land in perpetuity, subject to the conditions attached. So the conditions will be enforceable against any operator. So essentially obviously there's the restrictions on hours, the restrictions on the number of dogs, they're clear. There could never be more than 22 dogs on the site. They could never operate beyond those hours unless they applied and were successful in changing those. The management plan is also conditioned. So that is legitimate and fairly routine to condition a management plan or a scheme of some kind or an operating procedure. And essentially that means it's more complex to enforce because a management plan can include quite a lot of detail, some of which might be quite hard to detect if it's not being fully complied with. However, what could occur is if the business was clearly being operated in a very different manner to that described in the management plan, and it had changed hands, then we could enforce against that condition. So all I'm trying to say is that it's more complicated to enforce a management plan potentially, but if it's clearly been abandoned, then there could be a breach of condition notice served on any operator of the site. In terms of bats, the ecological survey looked at bat roost potential within the stables. They didn't find any issues, any bat roosts. So it's just the nesting birds that they said needed mitigating through free habitat boxes on the stables.
Henry.
Thank you, Chair. I have one question, but for the benefit of Mike and Tony, as the only person who voted against your recommendation, it was just that I could see some counterproductive instances, for example, where a very noisy, disruptive dog had to be removed by the owner, where it would have been counterproductive to ban customers from accessing. But my question was, the real crux of this matter seems to be noise disturbance for people in the valley. And we've got two conflicting sets of information we've been presented, where dogs will be constantly barking all day, and there are a very well-behaved set of dogs that won't, and there are other dogs barking anyway. Would it be possible or feasible to have a more complete sound profile for the hours of operation presented that replicated 22 dogs on site and compared what could be to what is there currently in a more accurate manner, so that we're making a more informed decision?
Thank you, Chair. I think the only answer to that is that officers are satisfied with the level of information provided in terms of the initial noise report not going far enough, the second noise report based on actual experience during a trial day, which seemed to us to be relatively representative in terms of the number of dogs brought to the site, the way they were brought to the site, and then the observations of the acoustician. It seemed to us that that was a reasonable attempt to simulate what would occur during the actual operation of the business. So from an officer's point of view, there is no need for further acoustic information.
Marianne?
Thank you. I'll be quick. There's obviously been loads of public engagement on this, and I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming, because it's really good to hear from you. There's obviously an issue with noise nuisance, because, you know, that's been raised in all the objections and everyone in this room. So, I mean, obviously we've heard there's a management plan and only trained dogs will be there, but I just wondered, is there a mechanism for genuine engagement with the business owner if this goes ahead? Like, without prejudice, obviously, you know, there are, you know, strained relations now between the business owners and the residents. You know, if there were continuous barking issues due to poor management, for example, I am still a bit worried about the accountability. Did you say it would just have to go through the usual council, like, complaints process for noise nuisance?
Yeah, essentially. So as with any facility that generates noise, when a complaint, so if a facility is operating in a way that causes disturbance, generates complaints, there will be complaints made to the council. They'll be fielded by both the environmental protection team and the planning service, where there's a planning permission in place, and then we basically agree what mechanism is best to resolve the particular complaint. But yeah, essentially, if planning permission was passed and the use disturbed people through barking of dogs, we would look both at whether it's been operated properly in accordance with planning permission, and then environmental health would look at whether a statutory nuisance was occurring. Both investigations would take place and reach a conclusion one way or the other.
Okay, so it's just those usual mechanisms. And then quickly, one of the speakers mentioned the effect on horses. So if this is like an equestrian area, has that impact been measured, like the interaction between the horses and the dogs? Is that necessary to look at that sort of specifically?
So I think that relates to the overall assessment of whether the dogs are likely to be disruptive and whether that use of the field will disturb the locality. Because essentially, if the dogs are supervised and managed in a way that means that generally they're relatively quiet, they're using the field but not constantly barking or causing other disturbance, then officers' view is that that shouldn't then be incompatible with either the equestrian use opposite or with grazing in the surrounding fields. I can't see why it would be incompatible. There are dogs in that landscape anyway. It wouldn't be introducing something entirely new, albeit there'd be a nexus of a high density of dogs in one particular location. So it really goes back to that, and the reason that we are satisfied that shouldn't be an issue is because we come to the overall conclusion that the use subject to the management plan and the other restrictions should operate in a reasonable manner.
Liz.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I notice in the environment parts about this that the excrement will be collected and moved away on a weekly basis. But there's nothing here about urinating. You've got 20 dogs urinating around a field continuously. I wondered whether there are any plans to look after this field with regard to that. Should there be not something in the planning about management of the field itself?
For you, Chair, I think the simple answer is that it doesn't go into that level of detail. I mean, there will be animals on the land that will both defecate and urinate. Also, they've explained how they'll do with the feces. I think, from my point of view, it probably goes a little bit far to maybe risk assess and consider whether there'd be an excessive concentration of dog urine in the field from 22 dogs operating in a 1 hectare field. So we simply haven't asked for that information, and that it's not explicit in the application. So I guess if there was a problem, so if the dogs, for instance, urinate in a specific area, it then destroyed the grass in that area, presumably there'd be simple remedies to that, or just there'd be a patch of bare grass in that location.
Barbara?
Thank you. That partly asked my question and answered it. So really it was sort of how will the waste be collected and removed? I mean, I know from the field it's possible to sort of gather up the waste and dispose of it. Someone did comment about the amount, but I'm also concerned about the fact that if they're being walked on the moors outside the field, which I presume from reading it they are going to be, then how can people be sure that the waste produced by the dogs, and where 6 on a short lead, can be sort of collected and disposed of correctly? And the last thing is sort of, it did say something, somebody mentioned, I've looked at the staff dog ratios, which seem very slight, but somebody did say that they were going to train volunteers and use volunteers and trainees. Is that correct? And that'll be my questions.
Thank you for your Chair. So in terms of dog walking off-site, that wouldn't be controlled by the planning permission. The applicant has provided information on it because there was a question about whether there needed to be what's called a habitats regulation assessment, which is where a project can have an impact on a European protected site. So as part of that, an ecologist was appointed who then discussed with the applicant how he carries out his practices. He explained that him and his staff are instructed to pick up after the dogs, then safely dispose of that waste. So that is how he carries out his practice. That we have no guarantee that will always occur, but essentially the conclusion was reached that a professional dog walker, you would expect that there was likely to be the case, otherwise there wouldn't really be a professional dog walker, and in any event the impact of that many dogs in the context of the overall dog walking on the area wasn't significant enough that whatever the behaviour of the applicant, it would be very unlikely to have significant impact in terms of the planning impacts we would look at, which is impact on the special protection area, the habitats and the protected species it conserves. So that's the answer on the dog walking. Essentially, it's beyond control.
Collected and removed.
Thank you. So the applicant said that they basically would have a contract with a private firm to remove the dog feces on a weekly basis. So that's all the information I have on that. So they'd collect it on site, and then there would be some form of contractor that would arrive in some form of vehicle, collect it and remove it from the site. I don't know anything more than that, I'm afraid.
And sorry, the last thing was about the ratio of staff to dogs. Is that a licensing thing or is that a planning thing? This is curiosity.
So the ratio of staff to dogs relates to licensing more. The reference to volunteers and work experience, I think, that reference was made to basically discuss the social credentials of the applicant. So they're not reliant on that to operate the business. They were basically just saying that they do take people on as work experience as essentially something to benefit the community. That was why they included that information. But I think it shouldn't be misconstrued that they're actually reliant on volunteers to run the business. They have staff that they employ to do that.
Nicky, do you have a quick question? A quick question, please.
And I apologise, Michael, this probably is beyond your remit, but I have to ask it for my own peace of mind. Following on from what Councillor Elliott said about if people put in noise complaints, and there are various routes and possible solutions depending on the scenario, is one of those the extreme one that they could lose their licence to be able to operate?
I don't know the answer to that question. My assumption is that the licensing is likely to be based more on the welfare of the animals, because that's the team who deal with it. You know, are they kept in adequate conditions? I mean, obviously, if they're persistently barking, it may be indicative they're not being kept in a healthy way. But I suspect that noise issues themselves may not be a reason for revoking a licence. But it's not my area of expertise, so I don't know that for sure. What I do know is that statutory nuisance and planning controls would exist.
Chair, I find that very worrying, to be honest. I mean, I would hope a licensing authority had the power to remove a licence on the same way as they could remove a licence from a pub which is noisy and a nightclub which is letting people bring drugs in. But if officers can't give a clear answer, then I think I would move to defer this until we can get that information.
Does anyone want to second Mike's proposal to defer? Never heard what you said, Mary.
Oh, sorry, I just wondered if we could hear from the applicant, because I think he's got a response.
I can't really do that because I have stopped other people speaking, so I'm sorry. We know, you know, the public can't speak. You know, you have been warned once. If I have to warn again later, I'll ask you to leave. Vicky?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I wasn't entirely sure what the reason for potential deferral was. I think what the planning officer said is that, you know, his assumption, and mine as well, is that a licence would refer to, you know, the welfare of the dogs, and as long as the welfare of the dogs is okay, it's unlikely that the licence would be revoked. In terms of, you know, how much noise the dog's making, I wouldn't imagine that was a reason for a licence to be revoked, because it doesn't necessarily relate to the welfare of dogs. Of course, as the planning officer said, it may indicate that, you know, that there are welfare issues, but of course equally that might not be the case either. So I just wanted to make sure that the reason for deferral, the potential reason for deferral, was sufficiently clear.
I still find that very worrying, Chair, because as the applicant will probably appreciate as a former probation officer, you can set probationary periods for a lot of things, but clearly we're not in a position to do that for this if the licensing mechanism doesn't allow for the licence to be withdrawn in the event that the operation isn't being run properly. I mean, from the point of view of noise generation and disturbance to local residents, in the same way as that you can have that with a public house and a nightclub.
Sorry, Chair, just to jump in. Obviously, in terms of noise in a nightclub, that's something that is usually dealt with by planning condition. And here, as a planning committee, you do have a remit in terms of noise. And whereas my assumption, like the planning officer, would be that the remit of the licence that we're talking about is about the welfare of the animals. So, you know, you have a remit for noise and the impact that may have. More, in my opinion, more than an animal welfare licence. Thank you.
Therefore, thank you, Chair. Sorry, therefore I suppose I'm confused in that it sounds like you're saying we could put a condition in about noise, but given that there's no agreed level of what is seen as reasonable for dog daycare, how would that be measured? And given that there's disputes about the process in which it's measured, what might that look like?
Chair, I think the report deals with this in terms of the comments from the Environmental Protection Service. And obviously, yeah, the report does say that the limitations of the noise reports are accepted, and the planning officers are giving you their views on those noise reports. Obviously, as members, you know, the reason why you're asked to make the decision is your views may be different. You know, and that's you know, essentially what's before you. Do you agree with the officers and what their conclusions are, or do you have conclusions of your own?
Ladies?
Yes, yes, thank you. I think if it became a problem, then it would be calling the Department of Environment again to take measurements and do readings. That's what happens with anything that's under planning that's been passed anywhere in the city. If you're not unhappy with the noise, you call in Department of Environment and they do readings and do checks and sort out the problem. It's not, we can't do anything and just wash your hands of it. If there is a problem with noise, you call in the right people to do the right tests.
And that is my understanding. We have no more questions. Can we go to comments? Mike?
I can see this as a difficult one, and it has a number of questions have vexed us. I'm mindful that the Park Authority have put in an objection over this, and yet they have agreed to extensive work being done to a property adjacent that includes a menage, which is an area of land set aside for horses to train and practice on. And it reduces the ground to basically dirt, so there is nothing growing on there at all. So the Park Authority, from time to time, makes decisions that it will agree to certain landscape changes, normally on condition that there is an improvement to the area. And I think what we're faced with here is whether there is at least a minimum of no change, or certainly some benefit to this piece of land. There are certainly protection measures put in, and some of those come in under permitted development, including the fence. So someone who owns that field, they can put up a fence like the one that we've seen in the officer's report. I think overall, the officers have answered our questions to the best of their ability, and they have certainly covered off a lot of the points. I mean, people talk about the dogs being in the field as being strange, and yet we have across our landscape in this country farms that have ostriches, and they have llamas and alpacas. So having dogs for part of a day and not all day and in daylight, not in the night time, so there's no impact on dark skies. It's very difficult at one level to see what difference there is. What I do believe, though, is that the applicant does not want to suffer reputational damage. It does seem to me that this applicant is genuine and wants to see the best in terms of welfare for the animals that he is entrusted to look after. And on balance, I'm minded to approve this application.
Barbara?
Yeah, Mike, you've actually articulated a lot of my concerns, but the overriding thing for me still is 22 dogs in a very confined space and the effect of that on sort of the wildlife, because to me sort of outweighs, if you like. Absolutely agree. It looks like a very ethical, thought through business model. And I really liked a lot of what I heard from Mr. Irving, but it's just the fact that it's the number of dogs and the fact that we cannot guarantee that if this business model fails for any reason or changes hands, that the same standard will be continued. And we can't, it doesn't seem as if enforcement is far too lengthy a process, there's just no guarantee. So because of that, even though I do think that sort of there's a lot of merit in what Mr. Irving is trying to do, I'm going to have to sort of refuse on because of the effect on wildlife and too many sort of dogs in a very confined space. Thank you.
Barbara, Richard?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a tricky one. It's a balanced decision. A lot of the residents who've come here today have talked about the noise. I just don't know how noisy these dogs are going to be. But in a way, to me, that's almost irrelevant, because my concern, as a member of the planning committee, is actually planning policy. I'm really concerned of the impact on the green belt of this, if this application goes through. It will intensify usage. We've talked ad infinitum about vehicles coming and going, so that's going to increase vehicle use. In a very, very tranquil part of Sheffield. But more importantly, it will have an impact on the open nature of the green belt. You put I know it's permissible, but you put a 1.8 metre fence around a hectare of land and then a hedge to hide the fence, that will have an impact on the open nature of the green belt. Therefore, that's in my opinion, and it's a balanced view, that is in conflict with green belt policy, and I will be voting against this application.
Thank you, Richard. Henry?
Thank you, Chair. Occasional dog barking and the occasional gunshot are arguably two sets of noises that unify the urban and the rural area. And whether or not we would get more than occasional dog barking as a result of this is very hard to tell. I'm minded to look at the applicant's record and the fact that there hasn't been an associated set of noise complaints from his business in Crooks, and assume that he's going to be running a similar sort of profile business. In terms of the nature of the green belt, menage for 3 horses often has items in it for the enrichment of the enjoyment of those horses or the riders in terms of, jumps, things like that. And there's going to be similar objects going in for the dogs according to the report, such as, large tyres and things that you might find in a rural setting. And I'm afraid I'm going to disagree with my colleague and I say that I don't see it as urbanisation of the green belt or substantial change in use from its current use. So I'm minded to be voting with the officer's recommendation.
Thanks, Henry. Anyone else? Right, move to the vote.
For the recommendation, Chair.
Nikki?
For the officer's recommendation, Chair.
Mark?
Against the recommendation, Chair.
For the recommendation, Chair.
For the recommendation, Chair.
For, Chair.
For.
For.
Against.
Against, Chair.
Against, Chair.
That's 7 for, 4 against, so that is passed. Thank you very much. We'll take a short comfort break now. Can we be back for 20 past? At 24 02019 stroke FUL. Land and buildings between 119 and 127 Bevercotes Road, Sheffield.
Thank you, Chair. The application site is Firth Park Cultural Centre, which is located on Bevercotes Road in Firth Park. The Cultural Centre is a registered charity and plays host to a number of activities which aim to provide support to relieve the effects of poverty and to promote health and well-being within the local community. Activities include a homework club, sewing and cookery classes, a youth club, and clubs for the elderly people. In addition, the building plays host to a food bank, NHS cancer screening and blood pressure checks, and is a venue for offering prayers, including both during Ramadan and Eid. The property is in close proximity to Firth Park Local Centre, being positioned a short distance away from Bell House Road, Firth Park Road, Stubbin Lane and Ticey Avenue. Each of those roads are occupied by a range of town centre and community uses, including shops, hot food outlets, a Firth Park Medical Centre, a library and a Methodist church. The building that fronts Bevercotes Road, which is on the edge of the centre and is predominantly residential in character. The former Warncliffe pub is on its eastern side, which is now mixed use, consisting of a boxing academy and residential flats above. In addition, the site also benefits from an existing vehicle access and a yard area, which is access to the rear of the building. There is access from Firth Park Crescent. The aerial photo shows that the area is heavily built up around a tight network of streets and a one-way system which loops around Bell House Road, North Quadrant and Ticey Avenue. High levels of on-street parking are a feature of the area both within Firth Park Centre and the neighbouring residential streets, including Bevercotes Road and Firth Park Crescent. The section of Bevercotes Road where the front of the building is located is a one-way street heading eastbound away from the local centre. The front of the building is single-storey and is on the right-hand side of the image below. It replaced the former block of 10 garages, which was converted to former community centre and was opened in 2020. This photo also shows the existing dwellings which neighbour the site on its eastern side, which are on Bevercotes Road. This photo shows its neighbour on the western side. Despite appearances, the Warncliffe pub is no longer in use for that purpose and has become Firth Park Boxing Academy with flats on the upper floors. These photos show the existing rear elevation of the building. As can be seen, the split level nature of the site means that it's single-storey at the front and is two-storey at the rear. The two-storey section is flat-roofed, which will have covered canopy attached along its lower section. Both of these photos illustrate the relationship between the site and its neighbouring properties on both sides. The one on the left-hand side highlights the levels differences between the site and the nearest neighbouring dwelling, which is on the eastern side, with that house being positioned on a higher ground level than the application site. A tall and substantial retaining wall is positioned on the boundary between the two sites. The one on the right-hand side shows a relationship with the former pub, which is now the Boxing Academy, with the flats above. Along the eastern side is an external staircase and pedestrian walkway that is enclosed by high-level privacy fencing. These photos show the rear part of the existing yard area, which is in use for parking currently, where the existing vehicular access comes into the yards. They also show the nearest neighbouring dwellings positioned to the south on Firth Park Crescent are located a considerable distance away, and that the vegetation positioned in neighbouring gardens provide good levels of screening. The proposal is to construct a part 2-storey, part single-storey extension to the rear, which would approximately double the footprint of the building. The extension would allow for an extended cultural hall, a larger food bank, an office space at ground floor, and an enlarged hall to hold small activities and events for women and children at first floor. A significant problem with the existing building is the absence of a staircase to link the two existing floors, which means that visitors and users of the building have to walk the long way around to the entrance of the two parts. This will be remedied by the proposed works. The extension will be set in front both of the side boundaries and how the rest of the rear yard will be reconfigured. It would include 4 parking spaces to be retained, with 2 of those being disabled bays. A pedestrian walkway will be formed to the rear entrances, along with some small areas of soft landscaping. In terms of the proposed elevations, the proposal is to erect a part 2-storey and a part single-storey extension to the rear of the building. This would largely copy the same form as the existing building, with the roofs being flat. Due to the split-level nature of the site, the extension would only be visible from the rear of the building, with none of the changes being visible from the front elevation as seen from Bevercotes Road. Amended plans have been received during the course of the application, being considered in order to reduce the width of the proposed extension and lessen the impact on the neighbours on either side. As a result, the width of the extension would be approximately 19 metres at lower ground level, and this would reduce down to 13 metres at upper ground floor level. The overall height would be 7 metres on the main 2-storey part. This is the proposed side elevations. Again, the split level nature of the site is apparent. The proposed extension being on the right hand side of the top image and the left hand side the one below. The proposed extension would join the existing building fairly seamlessly and replicate its main features and flat roof detail. Its maximum projection would be 6 metres. This is the proposed internal floor plans for the new ground floor that would be level with Bevercotes Road. It shows the largest part of this floor would accommodate an extension to the existing cultural hall, as well as an office, kitchen, entrance hall, a new internal staircase down to the lower floor. The extension on the low ground floor would accommodate an extension to the activity room. The floor plan also shows there were existing rooms which include a library, meeting room, kitchen for the food bank and toilet facilities. The published officer report explains that the application has attracted a high amount of interest, with 28 letters of support and 4 letters of objection. In addition, 2 petitions have also been received, one in support of the proposal with 147 signatures and one objecting to the development proposal with 43 signatures. 6 additional representations in support have been received since the report was published, as is detailed in the supplementary report. The main objection themes centre around the impact that development may have upon increasing the demand for parking in the area on the tight network of streets in the immediate vicinity, which are already the subject of very concentrated levels of on-street parking. In addition, concerns are raised about the impact the development would have upon the residential community of neighbouring properties in terms of increasing levels of noise and disturbance, including at unsociable hours. Those in support explain the perceived benefits of the cultural centre in terms of the impact it has on improving community cohesion and reducing levels of antisocial behaviour since it opened. That is for it being at the base for activities for people of all ages and genders and it taking use of the streets. In addition, the representation and support set out the benefits of the existing use in relation to it hosting charity events intended to benefit the homeless, mental health awareness, arranging community litter picks and clearing snow and ice off the streets and paths in the winter months. Furthermore, those in support assert that the majority of its patrons live locally and walk to the centre, and that the demand for parking is very low as a result. The committee report sets out the assessment proposal that's been carried out by officers. It explains that the proposal to extend the building and provide improved community facilities is acceptable in planning policy terms, taking into account that community uses are acceptable both in residential areas and those near to local centres. In this case, the main assessment issues have been judged to be considering the highways implications of the proposed development and the impact upon residential community of neighbouring properties. The highways assessment has determined that the majority of the on-street parking is attributable to the existing uses in the area, and there's been evidence to officers' satisfaction that the use does not generate high demand for on-street parking, with many of its patrons living locally or walking to it. Highways therefore feel that the development would not cause unacceptable impacts on highway safety and the highway network in regard to the relevant tests in the MPPF. In residential amenity terms, officers are satisfied that the proposed extension is acceptable in terms of its overall scale and massing and will not result in any significant overlooking, overshadowing impacts or result in loss of outlook that would harm neighbouring properties. The concerns about the potential for increased noise and disturbance are acknowledged. However, the provision of the new internal staircase to join the different buildings, floors of the building up internally, should help with reducing the external noise levels. That's because people are having to walk around externally at the present time in order to access the different floors, which inevitably generates noise and disturbance associated with comings and goings. In addition, it's considered that with appropriate mitigation measures secured by conditions, the proposal is unlikely to result in any significant noise and disturbance for a lengthy period that would be harmful to amenity. This includes limiting the use to between 10 AM and 10 PM on any day, the prevention of any external loudspeakers, and requiring any plant and machinery to be first submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority prior to installation. Overall, therefore, the proposals are judged acceptable for the reasons explained in the report and are recommended for approval accordingly. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. We have one speaker for the application, and that's Kazim Islam.
Yep. All right, thank you, Chair. And thank you, members of the committee. I'm here today representing the neighbours of the centre, 147 who signed a petition and 34 who wrote feedbacks directly, totalling more than 180 signatures. These neighbours comprise of 63 from Firth Park Crescent, which is the street opposite the centre car park, over 20 from Bevercotes Road, including 119 Bevercotes Road, which directly joins to the centre from the east of Bevercotes Road, and 129 Bevercotes Road, which joins the centre from the west, and over 10 neighbours from Pattonmore Road, which is opposite the centre in front of Bevercotes Road. Hence, I believe I am truly representing neighbours from all sides of the centre. I also wanted to make it clear that I'm not here to represent the centre, but as a neighbour that has been living all my life in and around Firth Park, and I've been living on Firth Park Crescent for over 20 years now. As neighbours, we believe that the centre is a very reasonable case of wanting to extend the centre by only 6 metres from the current boundary of the building. We think it's a great idea to connect the upper ground floor, so you've got Bevercotes Road entrance with the ground floor, so that's Firth Park Crescent entrance. We know also that within the proposed plans, the centre continues to have a proposed purpose car park that will continue to cater for a number of cars. The current size of the car park is definitely a waste of valuable space, as it is barely used. and we are saying this from our own experience of using the centre. The current car park is too big compared to its usage. So it's a bigger car park than some of the supermarkets in the area and other shops, not to mention the post office, and there's a public arcade that's open 24 hours a day. And as neighbours who use the centre, sometimes there's only 5 or 6 people in some of the activities. So why would you need a car park of this size? The centre has presented a detailed analysis showing very clearly that the current car park space is too big for its use. Given this is a small charity, we are very impressed they did this and provided much more details than other applications we have seen by other applicants. There is no doubt that cars parking on the end of Firth Park Crescent are from the adjacent shops, and this is clear to anyone who lives in the area. For anyone to blame the centre is a clear distortion of the truth. In addition, we note the centre has also taken considerations of neighbours at the flats next door by having only one story on that side. The centre has improved the environment as it used to be a base for antisocial behaviour. People would come, burn tyres at night, and would have bike races on top of the old garages, the roof. We feel much safer, and plus it'll be an extension of the green areas as well. It will make it environmentally friendly. I know this committee is not a referendum on the centre, but the centre's been running for just under 4 years. However, I remind the members of the committee that the work of the centre has been recognised by local councillors who have visited various activities. For example, the Sheffield News, Firth Park Academy, Compassionate Sheffield, the Sheffield Children's Hospital and others. I don't need to mention that more than 30 neighbours who gave feedback directly. Some of them will normally not even get involved. You know, there's one young lady what lives in 206 Firth Park Road. She comes, uses the ladies' sewing club. We've also got a wheelchair user what lives nearby on 46 Toxie Road. And then a young man from 79 Bevercotes Road. You know, he's come, he's mentioned it's improved his well-being. He's kept a friend of his away from a life of crime, you know, as a direct impact, you know, of the centre on him. I just believe that certain, you know, neighbours are just being myopic in the sense that, you know, it's simply unfair to blame everything on the centre. So, you know, it's, you know, a built-up area. You know, the cars, whenever they see, it's always, you know, they assume that it's to do with the centre, but it's not. And like I say, I live on Firth Park Crescent, so I see, you know, who people what are using the centre, they're using the car park. It's other people what are using the shops and, you know, all around there what are using bottom. So, you know, this is, like I say, it's just simply unfair to blame everything on the centre. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kazim. Andrew, do you want to come back and do that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Aslam. I mean, I think we're quite persuaded by the planning merits of the proposal, as is set out in the report. I think what's been explained there is just what a good location it is for something like this, because it's so close to the centre and the community that it serves. You know, it's precisely the type of location which is advocated in planning policy. It's accessible by a variety of means, and the public transport is really good there as well in Firth Park Centre, with just buses going up and down Bell House Road all day in very close proximity to the site. So I think sort of that reiterates what we've heard there. You know, parts of the report where, you know, we're sold by the virtues of the location and the planning merits of the proposal. Thank you.
Barbara, questions?
Yeah, thank you. It's just one. I've noticed there's only sort of 4 toilet facilities for both floors. Is that correct, or am I just reading the plans wrong?
Do you mind if I wander across? There's toilet facilities proposed on both floors.
Sorry, when you say 2 facilities on both floors, I mean, I can just look at the plans and I can see sort of 4 toilets in total. So what am I misunderstanding? I can see 1 AWC toilet with a shower changing room on the upper ground floor. And on the lower ground floor, I can just, sorry, am I looking? There's 3 on the ground floor, yeah. 2 ordinary WCs and 1 AWC. And then ablutions alongside. So I'm just sort of wondering whether that's sufficient for a community centre that caters for so many people, that's all.
I mean, one of the issues at the moment, what I've tried to explain, is that there isn't an internal staircase currently. So that makes it quite difficult operationally, as you'll appreciate, from people having to walk the long way around to actually go to the lower ground floor. So I think if this proposal comes into fruition, it's just going to make the whole operation and function of the building a lot better, including, you know, the fact that the toilet facilities on both floors and an internal staircase to connect them.
That's not the issue. The issue is the actual number. It's used sort of, there's 4 toilets in total for men and women. Well, and they're not gender specific. So I'm just questioning, is that sufficient for a development this size?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes, you know, that's something that's outside of the planning sphere, because we don't have any sort of policies that would require a minimum number of toilets in a building comparable to the floor space that's within it. So I think that's a non-material planning consideration.
Henry?
Thanks, Chair. It was really nice visiting the cultural centre on the site visit and hearing about all the sort of extended stuff they do for the community. And I did have some concerns, though. There's several references to its use as a mosque, and I have absolutely no problem with that use. That's not where I'm going. But the condition 10 restricts its hours of use from between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. on any day. And I was concerned that during certain parts of the Islamic calendar, they may have to use the building outside of those hours. And I wouldn't want to create a conflict between its use as a mosque and what we've set down as a planning condition. If they do need to use it outside of those hours on specific instances, I would like to propose an amendment to condition 10 that they are allowed to do that up to a set number of times per year.
Well, the applicant has, you know, we spoke to them about that proposed operating time restriction, and they do feel that it's workable. So I think one of the explanations actually that they gave is that Ramadan is linked to the lunar cycles, and for the next couple of decades, it's actually going to be becoming more favourable in terms of when it will fall, for those times to get short, you know, earlier in the evening, as opposed to going the other way. So what they've said is that they're content to work with that proposed 10 p.m. operating restriction.
They're happy, I'm happy.
Nikki?
Thank you, Chair. As I said earlier, I'm one of the members for Firth Park, and I'm well aware of the good work that goes on at the Cultural Centre. Also well aware of some of the issues in the local area in terms of parking, antisocial behaviour, litter, and I understand people's frustrations, particularly on Firth Park Crescent. I think that the gentleman who spoke at the beginning is right in that you can't necessarily link the two. And I suppose myself, having been there and seen, I think it's takeaways, I think it's people driving irresponsibly and parking irresponsibly on the double yellow line, so using the takeaways in the shops. However, One thing we did notice yesterday when we went and visited was it's got those big gates, metal gates, and some of the complaints, I think one of the complaints that was lodged was just about this, you know, the sound of them and how noisy it was. Is it possible to look into whether it can be less noisy? There's a lot of clanging, and I know they're a bit old and you have to sort of shift them, and yeah, is there something around that, even if it's just a suggestion to the applicant about looking into that?
I think we'd have to just go down the route of like a directive, trying to just suggest that they trying to do something, a recommendation that they try and soundproof the gates. I think it's not something that Environmental Protection Service has picked up on amongst their list of points. From, you know, we've taken advice from them on the noise implications of the proposal, and just their recommendations are just all about things like, you know, the hours of operation, and that being restricted to not opening later than 10 p.m. They didn't want to see any external loudspeakers fitted on the building. If there was any need for internal amplification systems, then it's prescribed that the noise from that shouldn't exceed existing background noise levels. And then the other thing is, because probably they'd observed that there's the food bank operation and the kitchens and the cookery classes going on in the building. They said that if there needed to be any external plants added to the building, that they can't install that without submitting details to us first, for us to assess those details before confirming whether they'd be suitable installations or whether they would need any mitigation or different equipment option, so that it's not noisy or gives rise to any odour problem. I was saying that it'd probably have to be a directive, I think, so I don't know that we can compel them to replace their gates through this application.
Is there no way of suggesting it?
Chair, if members want to add a directive that, again, like a condition, can be proposed, seconded and voted on. Thank you, Chair.
Does it create a lot of extra work?
That's not the point, is it?
No, I'm just curious. I'm curious.
At the risk of, you know, putting what we do down, no.
Suppose that just the key difference would be a directive isn't enforceable, so it's just it's got no teeth effectively. It's just kind of like, it would go on the decision notice as an advisory, but ultimately we wouldn't have any powers of enforcement if they were not to adhere to that suggestion.
Thank you. I mean, communicate it, so that seems fine to me to use that. I don't think it would have to be enforced, because I'm sure they would do it. So yes, can I propose that is the directive?
Propose a directive, yeah. Do everybody to second that? Can we have a show of hands, please? The directive to look into the gate, you know, to make sure the gates are less noisy.
I can't see for
10, 10, 4.
That's all right, I missed that.
I'll leave that to you and go to write that. That's it, Nicky. Yeah. Mike.
Yes, Chair. This seems to me to be a very positive application. It's nice to see a cultural centre that is growing and expanding and is popular in the community it serves. And I can't ask the question because Henry's gone and done it. So thank you, Henry.
Any more questions? No? Can we move to Mr. Tony? Comment, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I believe when we went to the site yesterday, you could see the potential there is there, and all the activities that are going off in there, from a food bank to children's to a mosque. I think it's a wonderful place, and I would personally vote with the offered recommendation on this one. Thank you.
Barbara has a question.
Yeah, it was just clarification because, sorry, I didn't get my hand up, Tony, in time. On page 53, it mentioned the call to prayer on a Friday, but it was only sort of checked on a Tuesday. I mean, sort of, is there sort of been, this is purely clarification, I know Friday is significant in the Muslim calendar, in the Muslim week, but is that, I mean, I presume it's not valid application, but is there any evidence that sort of the call to prayer is every day, is Fridays? Or is this the only evidence that we've got against it? Page 53. Oh, sorry, it does say every day. And yeah, I've read, does it happen every day? Is it just coincidence that it wasn't this day? And I presume that there's a condition that it shouldn't be because it says everything should be contained within the building. And that's covered, that covers that concern,
Yeah.
I presume.
I mean, I think going back to the original planning permission for when the cultural centre was granted, then it was understood that prayer facilities were one of the uses that was going to be carried out within the building, so I don't think there's any concern from a planning point of view about call to prayer taking place at any given time within the main daytime hours, such as 1:15 p.m. Obviously, we tried to look at things like there's a condition I mentioned about saying we don't see any loudspeakers to be fitted on external to the building, and yeah, we've not had an indication that any of the proposed conditions are of concern to the applicant, and that, you know, the conditions have been discussed with them. So I think the page 53 is actually the section of the report which talks about the assessment that's been carried out on the highways impacts. So I think that was a visit that was undertaken by the Highways Development Control Officer that was on a Tuesday. So I don't know if Helen's got anything to add at all about that, because I think it would probably just in the context of how many, you know, whether that can lead to a spike in visitors, I suppose that's...
No, I think it was just the case that it had been mentioned that it was every day, and that the highways officer who went out at the time, actually, it was a Tuesday, yeah, covered that period in time and didn't hear anything. I think that is as much as, you know.
No, that's fine. It was just sort of, you know, it would be covered by the condition 3 in any way. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Richard?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just, I'm hesitant. I'm going to make myself look a bit of a fool, I think. If you go back one slide, don't say anything, Mike. If you go back a slide to the side views. Yeah, you've got what I would call 3 blocks of building. But if you then go forward to the ground floor, you've got 2 blocks. And if you go forward again, you've got another 2 blocks. And I just visually can't take that in.
This is the extension.
So that's
ground floor. And the extension on the second floor is not as wide to account for the...
So where's the 4th block going? I just can't get it, sorry.
I might just wander across to the screen, if that's okay.
When you say ground floor, street floor.
Street floor on that floor, but on this floor here.
But would you call that the ground floor? Would you call that the ground floor? Right, okay.
Okay, so they're extending the ground floor at the back, which is lower. And then, where's the next picture?
So that was like the bit of the void, so that's just the existing part of the building.
Right, okay, thank you. With that in mind, that does actually clarify it, thank you. I can't see any area for storing bins. Is that something that should be there or not? Because I am slightly concerned that they are eating more and more into the car park. And there doesn't seem to be anywhere where they're going to store their bins.
Helen, could I ask you about that, sorry?
Chair, in terms of the car park, I think there is ample space where you can store the bins and still make sure that those 4 spaces are usable. Okay.
Following up on that, would that be something you'd want to secure by condition to make sure there is a designated space? I'm mindful that a lot of people do come in through the Firth Park Crescent entrance, and you don't want the bins obstructing access for either pedestrians or vehicles.
If that's what members wanted to say, I wouldn't see that as being an unreasonable request.
I'll propose that then, Chair.
I'll be happy to second it.
I take a vote on that, please, which is a dedicated bin storage area. Four. 1, 2, 3. Against?
Not against, but I think we should get clarification on whether their collection is from Bevercote Road or Firth Park Crescent before we tell them to store their bins on one side of the building or the other.
Chair, could we leave it to officers to resolve that if this application is agreed, which I believe it will be?
Chair, just on that, I think you could delegate the wording of the condition to planning officers for the submission of plan showing where the bins, and obviously for that to be approved and then carried on in accordance with that plan. Thank you.
I'd be perfectly happy to support bins going somewhere, Mike, yeah.
So,
good man. Happy with that, effectively that's what we've agreed. Yeah.
Any more comments?
Very briefly, reading the documents, I think the key thing is I think this is a great application and I'll certainly support it. My only slight reservation is making sure that the hours of opening are kept to whatever they're agreed, because it is a residential area. Well, it's a mixed-use area, really, but there are a lot of residents in the very near locale.
Thanks, Richard. Anyone else? Can I move to the vote then, please? Mike?
For the recommendation, Chair.
For the recommendation, Chair.
For the recommendation, Chair.
For, Chair.
For, Chair.
For, Chair.
For.
For.
For, Chair. For, Chair.
For, Chair.
That's unanimous. Thank you. That's passed. Thank you very much. Right, item 7C, we're including 7D in this as well, which is application number 24/01672/full Parkhill Estate, Duke Street, Parkhill, and planning application 24/01673/LBC, Parkhill Estate, Duke Street. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair.
So this presentation relates to the full application and the associated listed building application for the refurbishment of Phase 5 of Park Hill to form 105 residential units and a Class E commercial unit. This slide shows the location of Phase 5, so it's positioned at the southern end of the Park Hill estate. South Street is located to the west, and Norfolk Road and Talbot Road are located to the south. The aerial view shows a little bit more detail, so again you can see South Street to the west of the site, and beyond that is South Street Park, and again beyond that is the station and the town and the city centre beyond that. To the north, east and south is predominantly residential development. The Norfolk Park conservation area is located on the opposite side of Talbot Street as well. So Park Hill is the largest listed building in Europe. It was built between 1957 and 1961 as an ambitious social housing project, but it fell into disrepair in the 1980s and 1990s before being listed in 1998. Over more recent years, extensive regeneration and refurbishment of the building has taken place. Phase 1 application, the Phase 1 development was completed in 2013, and Phases 2 and 3 then followed and have now been completed. Planning permission has been granted for Phase 4, but that's yet to be started. And this application is for the final phase of the redevelopment of the estate. So I'll just run through a few photographs of the site. So this photo is taken from the internal courtyard area formed by the hook of the building at the southern end of the site. This photograph is taken from a similar position but looking to the south of the building. This is a view taken from Norfolk Road. This is the very south of the site and is where Park Hill is at its lowest point, which is 4 stories. At the northern end of the site, in Phase 1, it reaches 13 stories, but there's a consistent roof height across the entire building. This is again taken from Norfolk Road, but further back, given a little bit more perspective, and you can see the dwellings on the right-hand side of the image, which are within the Norfolk Park conservation area. This is an image taken from South Street, the west of the building. Towards the left-hand side of the screen, you can just make out the refurbished extent of Phase 2 development, so you can see the darker windows and these cleaner and refurbished concrete frame of the building there. And this is an image again taken of that same junction, so to the left-hand side of the screen you can see the Phase 2 development, and to the right-hand side of the screen is this Phase 5 proposal. This is another image taken from South Street, just showing the extent of the building. And this is an image taken from the other side of the site, and you can see the bridge links there to the right-hand side of the screen, and they link across to Phase 3 of the development. This is an image taken from one of those raised bridges, which gives a view towards the south, towards Talbot Road. And again, another image taken from sort of the internal courtyard area towards the south of the building. And this is taken from Talbot Road, which shows the development, the lower end of the development. And the final photo there again is taken from Talbot Road, at the southern end of the block. These are just a few images of the existing building, so showing what the existing elevations look like and including sections. One of the key characteristics of the Park Hill estate is that they have these streets in the sky, which are you can see those sort of in the middle blocks as the streets in the sky, which are open decks found at every 3rd level. All the front doors are accessed off this deck, and then the residents either go upstairs or downstairs to their accommodation, and the streets run through the whole estate. And this is just an existing layout of the original apartments. This is an overview image showing the proposals. So to the very left-hand side of the screen, where it looks more blue in colour, is the Phase 2, and then the remainder of the development proposed through phase 5 is located to the rest of the screen, and you can see how the building varies in height from 7 stories, where it links to phase 2, down to 4 stories at the southern part of the site, and that's because of the topography of the site. I'll run through a number of layout plans, but I won't linger on them for too long. This is level 7, which is the lowest part of the site, and the area in blue is the proposed commercial unit. So that's just next to the main entrance, which is in the darker grey, where the 2 cranks of the building meet. And there's also a bike store and a recycling store proposed in that area of the building. Then as we move up the building, the rest of the development is proposed for residential apartments. The different colours on these layouts indicate different apartment types, and there is a mixture of 22 one-bed units, 69 two-bed units, 13 three-bed units and 1 4-bed unit. So I'll just run through those quickly. Then this is an example of one of the flat types, and another example of a flat type. All of the flats and townhouses are dual aspect. The majority of them meet the nationally described space standards, but there are a number of them that don't meet the standards, and that's approximately 31% of the units. However, in the majority of these cases, the overall size of the units would meet the standards, but it's just that the bedrooms are slightly below the recommendations. It's also highlighted that we don't have an adopted policy which requires the NDSS. And in any event, officers consider that the standard of accommodation would be high. There's good access to amenity space as well, with all apartments and townhouses having some external space in the form of a balcony or a patio area at ground floor. This is an example of an unfolded elevation, so it wouldn't look like that in reality because it's because the cranks are at angles, but this is just an unfolded elevation. In terms of the proposals to the external facade of the listed building, it's proposed to retain the existing concrete frame and repair it, and to retain the existing brickwork and clean the brickwork up. The main interventions are the replacement of the windows with windows of full height glazing and with darker frames, and also to apply some colour to the balcony reveals and window reveals. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, you've got the existing building, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you've got the phase 2 facade. And essentially, the proposal for the phase 5 is to largely mirror what's happened at phase 2. So it will look largely the same as the image on the right there. This is just a visualisation of the lobby, which will be at ground floor, which will be where phase 2 and phase 4 meet. And then another visualisation of the courtyard area. In terms of the implications on the listed building, it's considered that the proposals allow for the retention of the special character of the building, whilst also allowing for modern contemporary living. And it's considered that there will be less than substantial harm to the listed building, and that any harm would be outweighed by the public benefits of bringing the building back into use. This image shows the layout of the highways, parking areas and the landscaping. So there's 2 parking areas proposed to the west of the building, which will be accessed from South Street. They will provide a total of 32 parking spaces, which would be a ratio of 0.3 spaces per unit. The ratio is slightly lower than has been found on other phases of the development, but it has been informed by a survey of the existing parking areas and how well they are used. And I think that survey found approximately 70% of the spaces were in use, and so that was extrapolated down to form this ratio of 0.3 spaces. It's also highlighted that the site is in a really sustainable location, really close to the train station, tram stop and bus stops. There's also a condition related to highways improvement works which will require upgrades to the nearest bus shelter on Talbot Street. And there are some traffic calming measures proposed on South Street, which are similar to the traffic calming measures which have taken place further down there. In terms of landscaping, there's a mixture of public and private amenity space proposed. So the area which is within sort of the hook of the building will be private amenity space for residents of the building to use. And the wider areas to the west of the building will be accessible to the public. There are a small number of trees to be removed, but they're all category C, and there will be a wide replacement planting scheme. There will be a net gain of 19% in terms of biodiversity, in terms of habitat units. In relation to policy, the site is within a housing area. The principle of the reuse of the building is acceptable. It will help boost housing supply on this sustainable brownfield site. There is no affordable housing proposed, but there is no policy requirement for affordable housing in this part of the city. So the officer recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Sarah. We have two speakers on this, which is 4, and the first one is David Watkins, please. You have 5 minutes, David.
All right, I'll try and be as quick as I can. It's getting late, isn't it? Yes, my name is Dave Watkins, and I'm a resident of Park Hill, and I've been to a number of these planning meetings before, including the one for Phase 2, which is obviously up for this Sterling Prize, so it's, I think, no surprise that I'm in favour of this development. It's a bit shame that there is not more residents here, but there doesn't seem to be a furore about like the parking last time that's been resolved. I do support this application. As a resident since 2015, I know that not everything has been perfect in terms of the urban splash and the build and bit problems at certain times. But to their credit, I think both Urban Splash and Sheffield Council has stood by this project. Through the 2008 financial crash, then COVID, and then the daft Liz Truss time, you know, it's all been stuck with, and to be honest, it's a great place to live. So, but I have got a couple of questions. Firstly, about cycle storage. Phase 2, which was completed some years ago now, has still got a problem with bike storage. The original plan was to actually put the bike storage on the streets, outside people's houses, because the streets are wide enough there, but what they found was that would be a problem in terms of the integrity of the building, that people's flats would get wet if there was a leak, so they couldn't do that. So at the moment, Urban Splash are in a bit of a quandary what to do with the cycle parking. He did mention that there was going to be some in Phase 5, but you know, the original plan to put these bikes on the street has not really worked. So my question really is, or not quite a question, I'm worried that this project will be signed off by planning without adequate secure cycle provision at the finish. For instance, at the moment, there's only 36 for Phase 1, and that was done years ago. You know, there is a lack of, and because it was all in different phases, of course, all these phases, you know, this is only to do with Phase 5, so I'm interested in the kind of planning officer's kind of comments. And I don't want this to be overlooked. You know, the planning permission, I think, needs to be carefully considered before signing off this project. So that's my first point. The second one is quite simple. There's a very small note at the end in terms of installing photovoltaic panels on the roof of Phase 5. It's not part of the planning application, but it's really what the residents would quite like this. But Urban Splash have been dragging their feet a bit with it and not really engaging with it. So just when Steve comes on later, it would be quite interesting to hear what their plan is for that, whether we are going to get these solar panels on the roofs. It'd be quite nice. Right, and so I'm hopefully ahead of time. That's my point. I really support the application.
Thank you, David. Our next speaker is Steve Thomas, please.
Are we on? Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak. Excuse me. My name is Steve Thomas, Development Manager at Urban Splash, and I'm responsible for the day-to-day regeneration of the Park Hill estate. Urban Splash have a long history with Park Hill, spanning back almost 20 years. It's a place we're extremely passionate about, and alongside our partners, Places for People, we are committed to realising the original master plan vision set out in 2006. Phase 5 marks a final chapter in this long journey, and will build on both the thriving mixed-use community that's already been created, excuse me, the £100 million already invested, and move the Park Hill estate closer to the completion of its long-awaited regeneration. We welcome the officer's recommendation to approve these applications, as they reflect the significant amount of hard work and collaboration from both ourselves and a multitude of other stakeholders. Park Hill is one of the most ambitious regeneration projects in the UK, and with Phase 5 we build on the success of all the previous phases. These proposals will comprise of a further 105 high-quality residential homes on a site already identified for housing, and will range from one-bed apartments to a four-bedroom townhouse, 20% of which are intended to be delivered as affordable housing through, in line with the development agreement that we signed back when we start the regeneration. The result of this will be a significant positive contribution to meeting Sheffield's identified housing needs, and also ensure the long-term conservation and protection of this iconic Grade 2-star listed building. These proposals also include over 2,000 square feet of ground floor commercial and amenity space, which will provide opportunity for local businesses and create new jobs. Given the ongoing success of Phase 2 and the recent approval of Phase 4, we've again retained the same award-winning architects Michael Richards and the rest of the consultant team to ensure we're incorporating the lessons learned from previous phases and building on this experience within the final phase. The brief for this proposal was to create an exemplar, sustainable residential community, landscape-led with modern and highly sustainable homes, and continue the ongoing reinvention and restoration of this important listed building. Throughout the design process, we engaged with the local community, residents groups, ward councillors, and hosted an open public consultation which was well attended. Overall, feedback was very positive and provided valuable insights which were incorporated into the final design submitted, along with lessons learned from all the previous phases, including the Phase 4 application from last year. Key design challenges which Dave's already highlighted actually were: one, renewable energies, which led to our intention and commitment, if technically possible, to install solar panels as part of the Phase 5 base specification, and the need for enhanced cycle parking provision. Despite being policy compliant, which has led us to submit a wider cycle parking strategy as part of this application, which will enable us to maximise the amount of cycle parking on site and be delivered as part of this phase of the development. One of the key solutions in there is the on-street cycle parking on the streets in the sky, but we just do need to work for a technical solution on that. We've also worked hard to strike the right balance between public open green space, residence amenity and parking provision, including shared facilities such as the communal allotments, whilst keeping car park provision to a minimum. We feel Phase 5, the scheme submitted in these proposals, balances the wide variety of requirements for the majority of residents and visitors. Both these applications are recommended for approval with no statutory objections. The proposals bring a prominent vacant residential building back into meaningful use on a brownfield site in a highly sustainable location, and represents the final piece of the jigsaw in the regeneration of the Park Hill estate. We get more inquiries about Park Hill than any other project. This interest is both national and international, from schools to the best regeneration practitioners worldwide. In conclusion, this application represents a final phase in a long-standing regeneration of Park Hill. It will deliver high-quality homes fit for modern-day living, alongside new commercial space for local businesses, all set within a new public realm. These proposals represent sustainable development and the ongoing growth and renewal of this iconic part of Sheffield and the community that lives and works there. Park Hill is special, it's unique, and we're all passionate about finishing the job that we've started. I therefore respectfully urge members to follow your officer's recommendation and approve this application today. Thank you for your time.
What's you, Steve? Sarah, you've got to...
Thank you. So yeah, just to pick up a couple of points. Firstly, from Mr. Watkins, in relation to cycle storage, the plans illustrate a cycle store within level 7 next to the commercial unit, which would have 29 spaces, but there is a requirement for 1 cycle space per unit. And so condition 20 of the application sets out a requirement for that level of cycle parking, and it asks for that to be considered in a number of ways. So I think there's 3 different ways, either within the streets in the sky, or within the landscape, or within some part of the internal building. So that will be reserved for future determination as to which strategy works the best. In relation to solar panels, there is a policy requirement for 10% renewable energy, and the applicant has submitted a sort of renewable energy statement which indicates their intention of how they may achieve that. Firstly, they're going to be some internal insulation to the fabric of the existing building, and then in terms of other options for renewable energy, they are considering solar panels. So that is one way in which that energy could be achieved. However, we can't prescribe that that actually occurs, so it will be down to looking at the options and what's feasible and viable, particularly given the fabric of the building and the fact that it's listed and how it would impact on that character of that building. So there is a condition requiring further information about how the 10% renewable energy would be required. And then also just picking up on something that Mr. Thomas said about affordable housing. Obviously I mentioned that there was a 0 affordable housing requirement, but there was clearly an intention suggested there for 20% affordable housing, which is really positive, and it was suggested that that may be through a developer agreement or other. But just to highlight that, like I said, is very, very positive, but it's not something which we could secure through a planning permission because it's not a policy requirement.
Thank you, Sarah. I have Marianne first.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on a few points. I mean, I think, Sarah, you have basically mentioned them all, but I just think, you know, we have got some opportunities here and maybe we can go a little bit further, so I just wanted to explore them. I mean, with the lack of affordable housing, obviously there's 105 homes, not one affordable home. I know the bottom line is that you don't have to provide this, and it's quite clear on page 92. So I just want to understand, and I'm sure other people do as well, why you've not chosen to, given the history of Park Hill as social housing. It just seems like a glaring omission. And you referred to the fact that you're still going to aim to, you know, include the minimum of 20% affordable housing as under the original consent. So is that just 20% of phase 1 and 2, or is that 20% of the entirety?
Thank you. So, as the officer report sets out, affordable housing was provided in phase 1. There were a total of 96 units, and that equates to 21% of phases 1 and 2. Phase 3 was student accommodation, and phase 4 and 5 are standalone planning applications. Ultimately, if we are to, from a planning position, in order for us to be able to require affordable housing, there would need to be a policy position that enabled us to do so. And as I'm sure you'll be aware, the city is split into different zones where different levels of affordable housing are required. And this falls within a zone where 0% affordable housing is required. So from a planning policy point of view, there's really no justification for us to be able to ask for any affordable housing. And if it can be provided through other means, it sounds like the developer is intending to do that, and that's brilliant, but it's not something that we could insist on.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I think I set that out, that, you know, I don't expect us to be able to change it. I just wanted to understand if that 20% is just part of phase 1 and 2, which I think it is, isn't it? So is that right? It's not part of the whole, it's not 20% of the whole thing. Okay, that's great. So then the other two things, I think we've got opportunities here. You know, this is an iconic building and, you know, the resident has referred to solar installation. I think residents are for it and it's not been specifically included. So, you know, my understanding is it's a flat roof. It should be easy enough to install during the development. You know, it should be a fairly obvious addition. I just wondered what the barriers are to us mandating that now as a committee.
Well, we have put a condition requiring 10% renewable energy, and obviously there's lots of different options that could take, and solar not being the only option but being a option. So I think it would be too prescriptive to include a specific requirement for that in particular. Also, it is a grade 2 star listed building, and it's how the solar panels would impact on the fabric of that listed building and the views of it, particularly given that the roof of the building actually is quite a feature of it because it's continuous across the site. It's really prominent. You see it from all over, as I'm sure you're aware. So I think there's more work to be done on as to whether it would be feasible and how it would impact on the building. So the condition that we've got, I think, is suitable to allow consideration of that within a wider package of potential renewable options.
I would like to push back on that a little bit because if you think about other listed buildings, like grade 1 listed buildings, like St James's Church in London, in Piccadilly, you know, York Minster, they have solar panels. So this is not a barrier. You know, and I do think we should be pushing a little bit more on this. I know Steve said it is, you know, it'll be included if technically possible, but I think we can be a bit better than that, and we should have that discussion. I'm just putting it out there for discussion.
I think given that the condition does require 10% renewable energy, and that's all our policy asks for, it asks for 10% renewable energy, however, in whatever form that may come, be it heat pumps or solar panels or however it may be achieved, I think it would be too prescriptive to say that it had to be solar panels, and also obviously there's about potential issues of the listing that we would need to consider as well. So I would be reluctant to add that specifically as a condition.
Okay, I mean, I really don't agree with that at all. I think, you know, we should be able to do that in this committee, and I don't know if I've got support of anyone else, but I think it'd be interesting to hear other people's opinions on that. And then obviously the bike parking, I mean, you know, I think you've said we can't overlook that on this occasion. So in terms of conditions, I mean, can we explore what we can put in there just to make sure that there is adequate bike parking?
So if condition 20 relates to cycle parking, and it does state in there that there should be provision for at least one secure covered cycle parking space per dwelling, so it sets out a clear number, as well as visitor spaces. And then it provides a number of options as to how that could be achieved, and further details will be submitted as part of the application.
Okay, thank you.
Vicky?
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to note that I share the planning officer's concerns about the solar panel point, just in terms of whether it would meet the 6 tests in terms of being necessary, because obviously the planning officer's dealt with what the policy position is regarding the renewable energy. In her opinion, wouldn't be necessary to go further other than that. Thank you.
Henry?
Thank you, Chair. And to segue nicely on to Marianne's comment about cycle parking, it's a fantastic location, Park Hill, amazing views, a very modern development. It's really encouraging to see that you've conditioned 1 cycle parking space per unit and only 0.3 car parking spaces per unit. I think it's a real sign of a good direction of travel for the city. With it being on a hill that gives it such good views, it's inevitable that there's going to be quite a lot of e-bikes in use if people are choosing not to have a car and use bicycles instead. Earlier this year in Sheffield, 3 people were hospitalised having to jump out of a building on Ecky Road because of an e-bike fire, and there's been more and more instances nationally with some very tragic results. As much as it's not mentioned in the NPPF, I would really welcome an amendment to condition 20 that stipulates the provision of fire-safe bike charging lockers, which are readily commercially available at a relatively low cost for residents that are charging e-bikes. It would remove a barrier to uptake to active travel. It would improve the safety for other residents, and it would be a good opportunity for Sheffield to be at the forefront of laying down some best practice against an emerging threat.
Thank you. Yeah, I can understand your concerns in relation to that. In relation to planning and policy, I don't think that we'd have anything that we could that would require us to stipulate that requirement. And also it would be covered, things like that would be covered under building regs, and also it would be for building management and maintenance. You know, it's their job to consider fires and fire strategy and safety. So as part of that, that will be required.
As it's not currently required under building regs, I thought it was an opportunity for the committee to go one further and show some best practice. If I had the support of other members, I'm aware that this condition wouldn't be a requirement, but it would be possible.
I think given that we haven't really got any policy stipulating or relating to that, it would be difficult to justify it. And I'm not convinced it's necessary, given that it would be for the building management and operations to ensure that the building was safe and that the fire strategy and safety was acceptable.
Mark next.
Thank you, Chair. Very impressed with the site visit yesterday. It looks, what's been done so far really does look smart. It looks, you know, really good place to live if the rest gets done. Its elevated position, I would have thought as well, lends itself to solar panels. But the question is, are there, in the bit yet to be done, are there any residents left in there, or is it completely empty?
It's completely empty.
Thank you, Chair. And in the interest of transparency, I should declare that I was councillor for what was then Castle Ward between 1990 and 1995, when the Park Hill was fully occupied and had an active Tenants and Residents Association, and had regular bingo on a Friday too, plus a number of pubs. None of them are running now. Also at that time, it was connected to the combined heat and power network running out of Bernard Road. Is that still the case?
I'm not sure, but I think we've just said that phase 1 is connected, but I don't think the other phases are connected.
Why not? They're close enough.
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. But in terms of planning policy, we would require 10% renewable energy, of which connection to the district heating network could be an option for providing that renewable or low carbon energy. So in terms of, we're just looking at this application as it stands. Obviously we're looking at the current scheme. We've got a condition requiring 10% renewable energy, and that could be an option which could be considered.
So is that something that we can decide here, or is that something that officers would look at with the applicant?
So again, similar to Marianne's question about the solar panels, that would be an option for providing this. The policy requirement is 10% renewable or low carbon energy, of which solar panels is an option, of which connection to the district heating network would be an option. And I don't think it would be appropriate to be too prescriptive about how exactly that is achieved.
I have to say that I'm shocked to discover that the other phases, apart from phase 1, have not been put on the combined heat and power scheme, given how close they are to Bernard Road, and yet we're running pipelines up past the university and towards Crooks. It just seems bizarre.
Nikki?
Thank you, Chair. If we're going to go back in time, I remember Urban Splash was a name I heard when I was a student in the late 90s in Liverpool, looking at what they did with some of the bars there and in Manchester, and it was always a sort of byword for sort of modern, innovative, sort of looking to the future. So I have to say, picking up on Henry's point about the battery storage, the fireproof battery storage for e-bikes, I do think that would be something that I'd hope Urban Splash would want to lead in. I think it ties in very much with our brand as a city, as the outdoor city. We're trying to encourage people to choose active travel instead of cars. We saw at the last full council, we had a member of the public who came in and talked about that the tension between the restrictions that on storing batteries for her mobility scooter in a council building in a communal area, and the tension of that against the risk of, you know, these awful stories that we've seen where they've caused fires. And so it would make sense to me that Sheffield City Council and Urban Splash would be leading the way on this, because it seems to tie in with a lot of the things that we all believe in. I understand from what you said, Henry, that it would only be a recommendation, a condition, is that right? Sorry, I'm not officer, I meant to go through you, sorry. Is that right?
I would have liked to propose a condition to that effect, yes.
I couldn't see any harm in doing that. I'd be happy to second that.
If members want to propose and second a condition and vote on it, that's within members' gift. Obviously, the planning officer can advise, as can I, in terms of whether it would meet the 6 tests or not. But ultimately, it's for you whether this is a material consideration that you feel that is necessary in order for you to feel that you can pass the application.
Sarah, your take on it?
Well, just the same as Victoria said there, really. I've provided my opinion. I don't think that there's planning policy which allows us to really stipulate that as part of the condition, or that it will be necessary given the other requirements and requirement of the managers of the building to ensure that the correct fire safety is being carried out. But if members want to add it, then that's members' choice.
Chair, could I just add that, you know, for a middle ground may be that members may feel inclined to support is a condition asking for the submission of a plan detailing how they propose that e-bikes could be charged within development, and then that so then at least then it's something that we're asking the applicant to look at and consider proactively, as opposed to a condition that would require them to do something that we're a bit more conservative about doing.
In the previous application, we were asked about Nikki asked about the difference between a directive and a condition. Is this something that a directive would be more appropriate, just asking the management or the applicant to consider ways of making safe fire storage? I mean, it's something I've raised on quite a few previous applications, and we're getting closer to getting something. But I am very conscious it's not actually a part of the planning stipulations now. So a directive, would that work better, Vicky?
Vicky?
Thank you, Chair. As we dealt with earlier, directives aren't enforceable. So obviously it would be it'd be for you as members whether you felt that it was something you would like the applicant to consider, or something that you felt the applicant had to consider and provide a plan which was then approved by planning officers. So it's just both options are available to you to propose and vote on.
Chair.
can I thank Councillor Belfield for her support on this as a potential middle ground. A proposal that residents are required to charge lithium batteries in an approved safe manner could be stipulated via lease conditions by the landlord and therefore wouldn't carry any cost to the developer.
I feel that would be quite hard to enforce, because how do you know who's charging what where? So I think the other options, either a directive or adding something to condition 20 stating details of a fire safe battery storage area, something of that nature would be preferable to that, because I think that would be very difficult to.
I was thinking it would have only been enforceable via looking at the lease conditions for tenants if they have to use their own fire safe option.
But I think we would need to be able to enforce it through our planning powers for the condition to meet the tests, the 6 tests, one of which has been enforceable. So I think I'm not convinced that would meet that test.
Yeah, can I just add to that? It's not just charging, it's the actual storage of the bikes. Some of them do combust through all sorts of reasons, including cars. So I think that, if you like, is quite difficult to enforce. I'd agree with sort of, my brain's gone by now, I've forgotten your name. How did I do that? Sarah. But yeah, I agree. I would like it to be looked at, because I think that is the way we're going in the future. More and more evidence is coming out, including problems with mobile phones and things. But I would like just to it to be sort of recognised that we do take this on board, and we would like recognition of it sort of in planning. To me, directive is the best way. But that's the committee's view.
I've got Richard next.
Thank you, Chair. My point is on a different matter. So Janet's... Yeah, so I'll bow to Janet for a moment.
Out of practice. Yeah, without wanting to labour the point too much, I think that, you know, fire prevention in flats is something that we are all rightly very aware of at the moment. And I think that although there is the case made by officers that, in a way, planning policy hasn't quite caught up yet with developments, particularly the rapid growth and popularity of e-bikes and the identified risks and concerns now, which I think Councillor Nottage has brought up quite rightly to our attention. I do feel that it is something that if there is a mechanism to impose a condition in order to mitigate that risk, if we have identified it, it is something that is perhaps more becoming visible as a real concern that we ought to pursue that. Thank you, Chair.
Mike?
Yes, just to follow on from what Janet said and what Henry's been saying. I mean, at the time when phase 1 was put in, e-bikes were not a thing, nor their batteries. And given what has happened in recent times with the fire on the house on Eckersall Road, and with what we know from Grenfell, I do think that the safety of residents living in flats deserves a high priority, and I would support Sarah's proposal that we secure this by condition for battery and bike storage for e-bikes.
My advice would be a directive would be the most appropriate way, but if members feel a condition is the way they want to go with it, then that's obviously up to you to decide.
I would prefer condition, because we're sending a clear message on the safety of residents living in flats.
Rhiannon?
Thank you. I think we're all on the same page, aren't we? So I'd like to propose a condition that the developer provides a plan to think about what provision for e-bikes will be included. That includes storage and fire risks, etc.
Sarah?
so just to clarify, I think I can reword condition 20 to include something of that nature along the lines of, I think that what we're asking for is details of storage of e-bikes and fire safety considerations.
Charging as well, that's...
So storage, charging and fire safety considerations.
Richard?
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify there that the planning officer's talking about amending condition 20 to take that proposal into account. So I just ask that if you do take this forward, that we delegate the wording of how Sarah makes those amendments to officers and to run those past the co-chairs. Thank you.
All happy with that? Barbara?
Just clarifying, because we heard originally that sort of there was a problem with sort of having storage facilities on the actual decks, the streets and the sky. And I'm just concerned that it would sort of, if you like, sort of contravene the listed building status by having something fixed. I'm assuming that something would be looked at within the landscape as opposed to on the streets, or is that something that's going to be completely open? Because what I don't want is a condition that actually is a disincentive for people to own a bike, electric bike, because the conditions are too onerous. That's my concern.
I think that, I suppose, the condition can be worded, can't it, to ask for details, but it would be unreasonable to assume that everyone is going to have an e-bike. So it would be unreasonable to think that every bike store or every bike space would need to have some mechanism about for fire safety and charging. So whether it means that there's a facility for e-bikes and a facility for pedal bikes, but I think that we can try and sort of tease that out perhaps a little bit by asking for more information, but I don't think it would be reasonable to suggest that every bike storage space is for an e-bike and needs a fire a safe charging point.
No, it was more the fact that if you have things located in one area at some distance from the owners, it's a disincentive. That was the main thing. It's just usability.
Yeah, but bike stores are often in a central area, on flattered developments. There will often be a cycle store within the grounds, within the curtilage, so it's not unusual.
So can I just ask if we can allow the officer to amend condition 20?
So moved and seconded. Can we take
So
a vote?
can we have a proposer?
I'll propose that. And I think just for clarity, you know, we're asking for a plan. So without any, you know, specifics at this point, we just want the developer to produce a plan to show that it's been considered.
Mike seconded.
Okay. Gemma seconded.
Yeah. Can I take a vote? Show hands, please. Unanimous. That's unanimous. Right. Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Richard?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief because I'm aware of the hour. I noticed that and it was talked about, the opportunity for commercial use as part of this development. Looking at page 70, it talks about conditions relating to hours of operation. Personally speaking, given that it will be on top of it'll be underneath residential properties, I think 11 o'clock every day of the week is a bit late, especially on a Sunday. And it's interesting, the three conditions, 36, 37 and 38. 37 actually reflects on why Sundays and public holidays are different to other days of the week, but 36 and 38 don't. I'd like to try and get a bit more consistency there if I can. I think it's, as you yet, as I understand, we don't know what the usage is going to be, but it could well be a shop. To have a shop open at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night, immediately below an apartment, I think is a bit not right, personally. And certainly disposing and moving of waste at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night is typically a noisy experience. And again, for the residents in the immediate locale, I think we can bring that back a bit. I don't know what others think, but I would propose, certainly on Sundays, 10 o'clock, maybe even 9:30, for operating for 36 and 38. 37, I think, is pretty much okay.
Right, thank you for that. So, taking two slightly separate issues there. So, firstly, in terms of the operation of the building, the condition 36 says no customers shall be on the premises outside of 8 a.m. and 11 p.m. I think given the small size of the unit and the fact that we've also got a condition saying that there should be no amplified sound or live music, we've also got a condition requiring details of sound attenuation for that commercial unit and for the flats themselves. I'm fairly satisfied that 11 o'clock is a reasonable time given those other conditions and those other elements for customers being on the site. In relation to condition 38, which is about the movement and sorting of waste materials, and that's between 8 and 11. In theory, I suppose that could be fairly noisy, so I wouldn't have concerns with that being aligned to be with condition 37, which relates to deliveries, because that will be comings and goings of vehicles and movement of things. So I think that that would be potentially noisy, and we could realign that to be in line with condition 37.
Right.
Sorry, is that being proposed then, Chair?
I'm happy to propose that.
I'll second.
Second.
Bits of it, but not other bits. So you were saying in terms of the waste, but not in terms of the opening hours. Was that what you were saying?
Yeah, waste only. Yeah. So, can I have a show of hands, please? Yeah, change back to 6 o'clock. Let's go through, thank you.
So just to confirm, that's condition 38, the hours being changed to be in line with 37.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's getting late. I just wanted to raise one thing that's not really come up, and it's not necessarily within the scope, but it's the antisocial behaviour, and this has come up a lot with residents. It's a well-known hotspot for criminal activity, just the area above the amphitheatre. The police are aware of it, the council are aware of it, but no one's really taking responsibility for it. And I know from speaking to residents that they feel threatened by people who are congregating in cars due to comments, and especially women. 20 to 30 cars have been reported like every single night in that area. So I understand, we can't make this a planning condition, but I wondered if we could look at maybe some sort of directive just to say that we've considered this, and, as a responsible developer, that, they engage in conversations with the council and the police regarding this to try and find some solutions. I know residents want a TRO to sort of make that space smaller so that less cars can congregate there, but I just thought I'd raise it because it's a massive issue for residents in that area, and obviously there's going to be 105 more dwellings there. So I think it's the responsible thing to do for the developer to engage in conversations about that.
So I assume it's the area you're talking about, sort of South Street Park and perhaps South Street as well. So they're public areas, and it really is a police matter in relation to antisocial behaviour. In my view, allowing another 105 residential units, which will provide more natural surveillance of that area, can only be a positive thing, because it will provide, natural surveillance of those problem areas. But I don't think it would be appropriate to require the developer to to liaise with the police in that instance.
Chair, could I just say that it is something that other colleagues in highways are aware of, and they are looking at the area in question and also in discussion with the police, so it is something that we are aware of in highways, but not particularly associated with this planning application.
Henry?
Yeah, just on that front, for concerned residents, I'd have hoped that in and of itself, the development of this final phase should provide some improvement, because there'll be populated buildings overlooking that triangle that has become such a hot spot for antisocial behaviour.
I think as Sarah suggested, this is a police matter. Oh, well, in conjunction with highways. I don't see that we can, and I'm sure Vic will tell me, I don't see that we can impose anything like this at all.
Thank you, Chair. As we've discussed already, with directives, they're not enforceable. So, in terms of adding a directive or not adding a directive, it's just really all you'd be doing is making the applicant aware of a concern of the committee. So, it doesn't really have, necessarily a massive impact. As you say, it would improve the surveillance of the area, and obviously highways are already aware of it. So, and obviously the applicant we know is representing the room, so obviously something they will also be aware of as well.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, which is why I didn't suggest it as anything more. I mean, I would like to see it as directive just so that it's down there and there's a written record of it, so that, the developer is made aware of it and has, a conscious thought about it.
You're proposing, Marianne, a directive.
Yeah, I'll propose that. I don't know if I've got any support.
What wording are you using?
Probably have to work on that. Something about consideration of the antisocial issues and criminal activity in the area, and that the committee would like them to work with partners to improve the situation.
Henry?
Just as a way through, would it be reasonable to suggest that the developer makes the building available for mounting CCTV on, should he be requested by the suitable authority, such as the police?
I just caution that, given it's a grade 2-star listed building, we don't necessarily want to be putting CCTV cameras all over it, so I'd be reluctant to include that as a requirement.
So we have a proposer to Marianne's directive. Do I have a seconder?
Right. Could I just ask, does CCTV have to be on the building though? Couldn't it be mounted on a pole in the grounds?
Well, potentially, yeah, but then even that, I suppose, is if you have lots of pole mounted, part of the listed building is its structure, but also its setting as well, which is the landscaping and the ground. So I'm just reluctant to advise that, given the listed status.
I was just trying to link the issue with what we can do, and I'm not sure I did that at all. So.
Well, I think it was a suggestion, and this obviously isn't anything prescriptive. It's just to sort of indicate that, we know it's an issue, and everyone else knows it's an issue. The police knows it's an issue. The council knows it's an issue. So just to make the developer aware it's an issue, and that if they could work with partners to think about mitigating that risk and the danger to people living there, then, surely that's something that we should be supporting.
You gave wording for a directive, Marianne. Do you want to stick with that wording?
I'm happy to stick with that wording if anyone will second it.
Do I have a seconder?
If going to get us home. I'll second that.
Yeah? Can we take a vote on that, hands, please? Those for?
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 6. Barbara, are you voting?
Which is no.
6, 4.
Against? That is passed. Thank you. Any more comments? No? Right. So we'll go to votes then. We have to do it in two parts because it's 7C and 7D. So on 7D, which is the planning application, 24/01672.
Are we doing 7C first or 7D? 7C, yeah.
What you said? Well, we have Park Estate, Duke Street, Park Hill. Can we have a vote, please, Mike?
For the application.
Support the application.
For the application.
For, Chair.
For, Chair.
For the application, Chair.
For the application.
For, Chair.
For, Chair.
For, Chair.
Yeah, for Chair.
Thank you, that's passed. Now we move to item 7D, planning application number 24/01673/LBC, Park Estate, Duke Street, Park Hill. Mike?
For the application.
For, Chair.
For.
For.
For, Chair.
For, Chair.
For.
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 For, Chair.
For Chair.
Thank you, that's passed. Item 8, record of planning appeal submissions and decisions. Can we please note that? Yeah. Date and time of next meeting is 15th of October, 2 p.m. in the Town Hall. Thank you very much, everybody.